Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. That feeling when you know a story will grip you from beginning to end. The one I'm about to tell has all the elements to do just that. It's the account of a photographer who, in an almost instinctive pursuit of the perfect shot, encountered something he never could have imagined. I've decided to share this experience because I still find myself thinking about what happened that night. For many years, I've worked as a professional photographer with a special preference for coastal landscapes. Although I work in various fields like couple photo shoots, family portraits, graduations, and events, what truly captivates me is photographing the sea and sharing these images on my social media. My primary income comes from these jobs, which is why I avoid exposing myself too much. I fear that somehow, someone might hear this account, and it could somehow compromise my work. We know how superstitious some people can be, and I don't want to take that risk. Sometimes, capturing unique coastal landscapes is a challenge, since many colleagues have already photographed the most well-known locations with their own styles. However, the greatest challenge, and also the most exciting part, is finding an unexplored place, photographing it, and being the first to share it before it becomes popular. This search for novelty has provided me with incredible experiences that I enjoy narrating in conversation circles. Today, I want to share an experience I had in early autumn of 2019. That year, I traveled to Maine from my hometown of Seattle. The invitation came from a model I had met through Instagram. We mutually admired each other's work, and after exchanging many messages, I decided to spend a week on the coast of Maine to create content with this new partner. He and some friends, also photographers, knew places that would be perfect for my style and insisted on guiding me. Among them were Marcus, Elliot, and James, all passionate about exploring little-known coastal scenery. The trip was incredible, but the most memorable point happened on the third day when we explored an abandoned lighthouse. This lighthouse, which they had discovered recently, was located near Cape Elizabeth, just outside Portland. It was the second time the group had visited the site, since they had stumbled upon it by chance initially, and didn't have equipment to photograph it properly. It was a weathered structure, rising 7 stories tall, painted a faded white with numerous cracks. It was clear that the lighthouse had been abandoned for a very long time. We entered through a door, one of the few that still had its hinges intact, and carefully managed to access the interior. Right at the entrance was a space that appeared to be a small reception area, completely devoid of furniture and full of debris. As we advanced, it became evident that the lighthouse had housed keepers' quarters in the past. There remained fragments of living spaces, swivel chairs, tables, and piles of papers, but we couldn't identify who they belonged to. We knew that staying there until nightfall would be risky, so we tried to capture as many images as possible before it got dark. Despite the 7 stories, we managed to climb only to the 4th since we began our exploration at 5 in the afternoon, and wanted to take advantage of the golden light at the end of the day. Additionally, the stairs were in precarious condition, and the lighthouse structure seemed unstable. giving the sensation that it could collapse at any moment. Two of our friends decided to explore the higher floors, while the rest of us remained taking photos. They were gone for about half an hour. When they returned, they were accompanied by a homeless man whom we'll call Robert, as he revealed his name to us. Robert introduced himself very politely and told us that he had been living there with some companions who, like him, had found refuge in that lighthouse in recent weeks. At first, we thought he might be irritated by our presence, considering we were trespassing. However, contrary to what we expected, he was extremely cordial. He allowed us to stay as long as we wanted, and even showed us a blocked path on the floor where we were. After crossing piled-up furniture and pieces of collapsed ceiling, we found a window with an incredible view of the ocean. Robert only asked that we leave before nightfall. My model friend agreed, mentioning that we already planned to leave before dark due to the risks of moving through the lighthouse at night. At this moment, Robert commented something that caught our attention. "That's not it. That should be the least of your worries. You have no idea what happens here after dark." I was so focused on taking photos that initially I didn't pay much attention. However, looking at the others, I noticed everyone exchanging intrigued glances. The comment wasn't elaborated on by Robert, and we ended up not insisting, thinking it was just a joke. The afternoon continued, and the daylight began to diminish. Robert, however, wouldn't stop alerting us to hurry our exit. He mentioned that the time was advancing, even without having a watch. Despite his constant warnings, we tried not to give much importance, responding that we were almost ready. He insisted so much that he even invited us to return another day, promising to carefully lead us to the top floor and even to the basement. All he asked was that we leave before it got completely dark. One of us, curious, asked why we needed to leave in such a hurry, if other people usually appeared there at night. Robert simply replied, "It would be better for you not to know. It's for your own good and mine too." He didn't want to explain, stating that he would also be at risk if he spoke more, and if we remained there until nightfall. In the end, his insistence convinced us. We began to organize ourselves to leave, realizing that whatever it was, he really wanted us gone. Even without understanding his concern, it seemed genuine. However, we took longer than expected to descend. When we reached the first floor, Robert began to show signs of nervousness. As we approached the door through which we had entered, he stopped us with a firm gesture and said, "Stay behind me." It seemed like he was protecting us. That was the impression I had at that moment. Although we weren't sure if it was prudent to follow him, we ended up doing so, attentive to each step. He didn't allow us to use flashlights to illuminate the ground, which increased our apprehension even more. The atmosphere had changed drastically, and none of us had the courage to ask what was happening. We reached the utility rooms at the back of the lighthouse, where he began to carefully move some wooden boards that covered part of a wall. There was a large gap that resembled an improvised corridor, as if someone had demolished part of the wall to create it. With slow movements and without making noise, he removed the boards and signaled for us to follow him. The corridor before us was disconcerting. He warned us to exercise extreme caution in this stretch. It was now possible to see a little better, thanks to the light coming from a neighboring building. We followed close to the wall on the right side, while on the left side there were pointed wooden stakes directed toward us. It was evident that he had placed those stakes there. Who would build something like this in a lighthouse? The stakes, apparently manually carved, formed a series of traps. We followed along a part where none of them were in the flat area of the wall. We noticed strange symbols painted in ink. Later, we concluded that the traps were the type used for bears. They weren't set, but they were positioned right below the symbols. Eventually, we exited the corridor to a narrow passage, the type that connects emergency areas or staff routes in some buildings. When we were finally outside, the man indicated the way back and said, "You can come back whenever you want, but only during the day. At night, things get bad in there, and it's not because of us or other people." That's what he said, and honestly, we didn't know what to think. I don't want to be prejudiced or rude, but considering his situation, we wondered if he was saying something sensible, or if perhaps he was influenced by some external factor. It was the subject of conversation as we walked to a more illuminated area toward one of the guy's cars. We all agreed about what we had seen: the stakes, the bear traps, and the symbols painted on the wall. One of the friends commented that the last time they were at the lighthouse, it was completely empty, with no sign of those men. Another mentioned that the symbols looked like protection symbols. He explained that his aunt, who used to practice some strange things, had already used similar drawings, supposedly to ward off demons or something like that. He didn't know if it was true, but the purpose would be to keep something away. That experience in the lighthouse was completely surreal. As we left and continued our journey by car, we were still discussing what had happened. One of the friends, in a tone of confession, said, "I need to tell you something. I thought there was something very strange about that old man when I found him. He was in a room on the second to last floor, where there was an absurd amount of dog or cat food. You know those packets with broth? There was so much food that it formed a small pile in the middle of the room. It seemed to have been there for a long time because the smell was unbearable, purely rotten. It was there that he greeted me," he continued. "He spoke softly, said some things until I mentioned I was with you. Then we went looking for Elliot on the same floor and came down together." He continued, "But before we left, I asked what that food was for because it didn't make sense. There was no sign of any animal there, no feces, nothing. Then he jokingly replied that it was better I didn't know. I thought he was being funny and insisted. That's when he said, seriously, that at night, a creature appeared in the lighthouse that he believed to be a demon in the form of a huge dog. According to him, this being left everyone in peace as long as there was food scattered around. The friend explained that he hadn't told this before because he thought it was a joke or delusion. But after everything we saw, the stakes, the symbols, the traps, it began to make some sense. At this moment, Elliot asked if anyone had noticed that the old man was carrying a weapon. We all denied it, but he insisted, yes, he did. It was in his belt, under his shirt. I saw it when he was guiding us to the utility room, and then outside. That's when the situation became even more disconcerting. What he had said about the creature might not be real, but there was something we couldn't deny. He had resources to hurt us if he wanted to. And the traps, who would put traps that size there, especially in an abandoned lighthouse? Even deactivated, they were immense and dangerous. We were imagining what could have happened if someone stepped on one of them without noticing. Everything seemed surreal, especially having happened in Maine, and more precisely in the Cape Elizabeth region. Such a busy area. During the rest of the week, we avoided returning to the lighthouse. We visited other places and left this experience as something unique that, to this day, we remember and comment on. Years later, in 2023, I passed by the lighthouse again. It was still there, abandoned and in the same condition. I don't know if it continues like this today. I never shared exactly where it is because we have no guarantee that others would have the same luck we did. The man didn't harm us, but what we saw was enough to raise an alarm. That is not a safe place. Buildings like that keep stories we could never imagine. Every day within their walls, things can happen that no one witnesses or reports. And if no one knows, these stories can simply disappear, for better or worse. They are unique experiences. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I want to share something brief that still gives me chills whenever I remember it. This happened many years ago when I was 16, back in the late 90s in a small town called Millridge, nestled in the pine forests of northern Maine. I used to visit my cousin Emma, who lived there. We'd spend hours talking, and when we weren't wandering through the town's quiet streets, we'd hang out at this tiny park. It was so small it only had one basketball court with makeshift hoops, just metal pipes with nets attached to a cracked concrete slab, and nothing else. A few ancient oak trees surrounded it, their branches creating strange shadows under the single flickering streetlight. As usual, we went there one night in late October. It must have been around 11:30, just after a light autumn rain that left everything damp and glistening. We were sitting on a bench near a closed convenience store, just steps away from the court. The street was completely deserted, and an unusual fog had started rolling in from the nearby lake. Suddenly, I heard the distinct sound of a ball bouncing on wet concrete. I didn't mention anything, just glanced toward the court. I saw nothing through the patches of fog, and returned my attention to our conversation. A few minutes later, I heard two more bounces, clearer this time. I looked again, but Emma didn't seem to notice. The court remained empty, the mist swirling gently across its surface. I thought perhaps it was just my imagination playing tricks, or maybe water dripping from the trees. Then, about 5 minutes later, we heard children laughing, not just any laugh, but the kind of carefree giggles that only come during intense play. This time Emma stopped mid-sentence. We both fell silent, staring at the court just a few yards away. It was impossible not to see whatever might be there. The court was so close, illuminated by that single streetlight cutting through the fog. But somehow, we continued hearing children's voices, laughter, and the rhythmic sound of the ball hitting the concrete, followed by what sounded like sneakers squeaking on the wet surface. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees in seconds. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms, and without saying a word, Emma and I stood up and left. We didn't run, but walked briskly, feeling an inexplicable urge to put distance between ourselves and whatever was happening behind us. The sounds only faded when we were far enough away. disappearing as suddenly as they had begun. When we reached Emma's house, an old Victorian with peeling blue paint just 3 blocks away, I finally asked if she had heard everything too. She nodded slowly, her face pale in the porch light. She admitted hearing the first sounds but seeing nothing, so she assumed it was something else, maybe raccoons or branches scraping together, until the laughter started. What disturbed her most, she told me with a trembling voice, was that she thought she recognized one of the laughing children as her childhood friend, who had drowned in the lake 10 years earlier. We never returned to that park after dark. I told my aunt and uncle about it the next day, but nobody else in the neighborhood reported anything similar. A week later, though, an elderly man who lived across from the park mentioned at the local diner that sometimes, on foggy nights, he would close all his windows to block out those children who play basketball too late. That night in Millridge, my cousin and I heard the same inexplicable things right in front of us without seeing anyone. We hadn't discussed anything supernatural before it happened, so it wasn't something we could have imagined together. Sometimes these things appear only to one person, other times to several. I still wonder what those invisible children were trying to tell us, and why they chose to reveal themselves on that particular foggy October night. My name is Ethan Cole, and what I'm about to tell you isn't something I heard through the grapevine or a story told by someone else. I'm certain of its existence because it's present in my life every day. Many wonder if it's truly possible to make a pact with him. The answer is yes, it's possible. I did it myself, and I'm here to share my experience. I hope my words prevent others from making the same mistake, as it was the worst choice I've made in my entire life. To understand my account, it's important to know my parents' story. My mother, Rebecca Wilson, was the middle child among 5 sisters. Catherine and Alina were the oldest, while Diana and Sarah were the youngest. All of them stood out in some way, except my mother. She wasn't strong, intelligent, popular, or considered beautiful. Aware that she would struggle to find good employment, she chose a way to make money that simultaneously satisfied her desire to harm others. She seduced wealthy married men with children, got pregnant by them, and then blackmailed them, threatening to reveal everything unless they gave her a generous sum of money. That's how my 3 siblings and I were born, each with different fathers. That's all I can say about my mother. As for my father, I never knew him, not even a photograph. My mother said his name was Victor, and that he was a follower of the occult. According to her, I was conceived during a single encounter that wasn't consensual. I am the product of that. My mother never hid how much she regretted my existence. She repeatedly said I should never have been born, that she should have aborted me. She blamed me for losing a good prospect due to my pregnancy. There's no way to describe the pain of hearing your own mother say she regrets giving birth to you. That's how I came into this world, rejected, despised by the one who brought me into life, destined to suffer and beg for any trace of affection in my miserable existence. My childhood was a living hell. My mother always treated me worse than my older siblings. Although she was never affectionate with them, the money their fathers sent made her treat them somewhat better. With me, it was different. I received the worst insults, the loudest screams, and the most brutal beatings. The only valuable thing I owned was a pendant made of black obsidian that appeared under my pillow one day. From then on, I never took the necklace off. When my mother saw me wearing it, she was terrified. She said she had worn the pendant the night I was conceived. I noticed she was afraid, so much that she stopped beating me for several months. But when the fear subsided, the abuse returned. To this day, I still wear that pendant. I hated my siblings with all my strength. They were cruel to me because they knew my mother would never take my side. They dragged me around by my hair, locked me in tight spaces, hit me, spat on me, and insulted me. Once they put me high up in a tree and pushed me. I broke an arm and several ribs. It was the only time my mother took me to the hospital. I remember seeing, for a brief moment, something like concern on her face. Sadly, that's the best memory I have of her. From an early age, my life was marked by constant suffering. My mother, Rebecca, always found ways to save money when it came to me. My clothes were old, often torn, and my shoes were so worn that I frequently walked barefoot. The food I received was scarce and of terrible quality, always inferior to what my siblings got. While they paraded around in light-up sneakers and new clothes, I made do with worn-out, used undergarments. At school, there was a girl named Jessica, whom I liked very much. One day, I gathered the courage and confessed to her, saying I had admired her for a long time. However, she laughed at me in front of everyone and humiliated me mercilessly. That was the last straw. With tears in my eyes and consumed by anger, I grabbed her by the neck and slapped her. It was the first time I had raised my hand against anyone. The laughter of the others stopped instantly, and their mocking faces transformed into expressions of terror. I ended up being expelled from school because of that. Going home to tell what had happened was like facing a cruel tribunal. I knew my mother would be furious. She gave me the worst beating of my life, using a wet belt. While she hit me, she repeated that my existence was a mistake. My siblings, as usual, watched from the corner, laughing at my pain. When she tired of beating me and their laughter finally ceased, I staggered out of the house with a completely destroyed heart. That's when I found a gold earring my mother had lost during the assault. I took the earring to a pawn shop and exchanged it for a little money. I used that money to buy more drugs, trying to find a respite from the constant torment that was my life. But peace never came. That same night, while I was out, I heard the sound of an explosion in the distance. It was our house. A gas cylinder had exploded. I saw neighbors running toward the fire and shouting. I stood still, watching the flames from a distance. The firefighters managed to save my mother and my 3 siblings, but they were all severely injured and taken to the hospital. My mother never left there to beat me again, and my siblings didn't recover enough to continue mistreating me. I know many might judge me, but the truth is that when I realized I was alone, I felt immense relief, as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to go home. No relative wanted anything to do with me. My aunts, who never got along with my mother, refused to take me in. I ended up being taken to an orphanage run by the Methodist Church. I was already 15 years old. That place was far from being a refuge. Many girls and teenagers who had supposedly been rescued faced abuse there. Life at the orphanage was a continuation of the misery I had always known. The nuns who ran the place were harsh and cruel. Even when I tried to report the mistreatment, the abuse and neglect persisted. It was there that I met Michael. He had serious mental health problems, but always found a way to make me laugh. Gradually, we became inseparable. Michael occasionally shared stories about his life before coming to the orphanage. The orphanage was a strange and unsettling place. At night, when everyone should have been sleeping, unknown people would appear and gather in the courtyard. They spoke words I couldn't understand and performed acts that seemed like rituals. The feeling was that a heavy shadow enveloped the place. One day, a peculiar couple arrived at the orphanage. Unlike other visitors, they analyzed every corner with attention. Whenever they passed by a nun, she would bow respectfully. Even the Mother Superior kissed the man's hand. Hidden behind a curtain, I observed the scene. When my eyes met theirs, the couple gestured for me to approach. I hesitated, overcome with fear, but there was something in their gaze that made me obey. As I descended the stairs, I noticed a nun whispering something to the man. He turned around furiously and struck her with such a violent slap that it knocked her to the ground. I couldn't contain a smile upon witnessing that. The woman, Margaret, noticed my reaction and smiled back. As I approached, Raymond grabbed my black obsidian pendant and frowned. It was as if he knew something about the object. At that moment, I felt confidence and told them everything I had suffered at the orphanage. Raymond seemed indignant, while Margaret stroked my hair, saying that it had all ended and that I would go with them. They took me to their home. As soon as I entered, I was impressed. It was an impeccable place with dark walls and crimson details, filled with exotic plants. On the second floor, they led me to a spacious room with a bed, wardrobe, television, and a bookshelf full of books. There was also a bathroom just for me. Margaret explained that the clothes in the wardrobe belonged to their deceased son, and that I could use whatever I wanted. They promised they would return soon. I took the opportunity to shower and try on the clothes. Although most were a bit loose, I decided to keep them all. I noticed that everything in the wardrobe was black: t-shirts, shirts, sweaters, everything. When Margaret entered the room again, her eyes lit up when she saw me wearing one of her son's favorite sweaters. With a smile, she let me know that dinner was ready. We went down to the dining room. The table was oval, made of polished mahogany with 7 black chairs, illuminated by a huge chandelier. However, what caught my attention most was Raymond's chair, a special seat with arms decorated with skull carvings. Noticing my curiosity, Margaret laughed, saying the skulls weren't real. A young maid served dinner and flavored waters. The food was the best I had ever tasted. For the first time in months, I ate something hot. During the meal, Raymond asked if I had ever tried alcohol. I replied yes, and he brought a bottle of wine, served it to all 3 of us, and proposed a toast. We celebrated the fact that from that moment on, we would be a new family. For them, I was the son they had recovered. For me, they were the parents I had always wanted. Months passed, and Margaret and Raymond truly treated me as part of the family. They frequently talked about the son they had lost, but never made comparisons between us. I felt so comfortable with them that one day I asked what had happened to him. They calmly explained that he had made an important decision in life, but things got out of control, and he ended up dying. My new routine with them was everything I had never imagined possible. They were affectionate and provided me with comfort I had never experienced. The house was huge, and there was always delicious food on the table. Over time, I got used to that new world. For the first time in my life, I felt valued and safe. One night during dinner, Raymond stared at me and asked if I had ever felt something special when wearing the obsidian pendant. I replied that there always seemed to be a kind of connection, as if it protected me. Raymond smiled slightly and said it was time to tell me the true meaning of the necklace. He revealed that the pendant was a symbol of the occult community they belonged to. He reassured me, saying I shouldn't fear, as the being they worshipped wasn't the malevolent devil most believed in, but rather an entity of knowledge. He explained that the necklace had guided and protected me since the day I was born. Margaret added that they had also been guided by it to find and welcome me. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. It was a lot to process at once. However, the trust I felt in Margaret and Raymond calmed me. I knew they wanted what was best for me, so I accepted their words and promised to try to better understand that community and its beliefs. A few weeks later, Raymond told me the time had come to take me to the place of worship. Mixing nervousness and curiosity, I agreed to go. We drove for hours until we reached an isolated old mansion surrounded by trees and without illumination. It was a dark but intriguing place. I noticed many luxury cars parked around. We entered, and the interior looked like just an old, abandoned house. But Raymond guided me to a staircase that led to the basement. Down there, a kind of mass was taking place. All those present were dressed in black, but wore normal clothes, not robes. In the center of the space was a body surrounded by a pentagram drawn with blood, illuminated by candles around it. Behind the pentagram, a cage with a raven caught attention, and further back, an altar full of books was arranged in front of a high priest who wore a robe and a mask. Raymond and Margaret led me to the front of the pentagram. The high priest stared at me and began a welcome speech. His words were intense. Although I didn't understand everything, I felt something deep connecting me to that moment and the people around me. At the end, everyone began to pray in low whispers, almost like a collective murmur. The environment was both disturbing and welcoming. I didn't feel fear, but a strange and powerful sense of belonging. Margaret approached me and in a whisper asked me to undress. She assured me there would be no danger, and that it was part of the initiation ritual. Hesitantly, I obeyed. I took off my clothes and lay in the center of the pentagram, where the lifeless body had been before. The blood on the floor was viscous and emitted a strong, unpleasant smell. As the prayers became louder and faster, my heart was beating so fast that I thought it might stop at any moment. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the cage being opened. The high priest held the raven and positioned himself standing beside my head. Silence took over the place. With a firm voice, he pronounced words in an unknown language and then sacrificed the raven. The bird's blood flowed all over my face. It was unbearable. I lost consciousness. I woke up the next day, lying in the bed in my room. I was clean as if I had just taken a shower, although I couldn't explain it. I felt that something within me had changed. I got up and went to the living room, where Margaret and Raymond were having breakfast. I sat with them and told them what I remembered from the ritual, taking the opportunity to ask several questions about the community to which I now belonged. Raymond explained that each occult sect has its own identity, combining practices and teachings from various strands of the occult. He said that now that I was part of the sect, it would be necessary to acquire a lot of knowledge to participate in intellectual discussions that challenged and expanded the mind. Beyond regular classes at school, I began to receive daily teachings about the history of the occult, its rituals and philosophies. Margaret and Raymond were always available to answer my questions and guide my understanding of this new universe. As time passed, my personality began to change. I became more confident, self-centered, and articulate. I developed leadership skills and a charisma I had previously been unaware of. At school, I quickly became popular. Many wanted to be part of my circle of friends. My confidence attracted various girls, and I began to date a different one each week. For the first time, I felt I had control over my life and was part of something grand. After my first experience in the ritual, Margaret and Raymond began to teach me about the different currents of the occult. They explained that there are two main ones, theistic and atheistic. Theistic occultism believes in Satan as a real, powerful, and present entity. Atheistic occultism sees Satan as a symbol of rebellion, freedom, and opposition to authority. My true initiation occurred a few weeks later. Margaret and Raymond took me to an isolated cabin in the middle of a forest. The interior was decorated with disturbing paintings showing desolate landscapes, cemeteries, and infernal scenes. One of them particularly caught my attention. A thin creature with 6 long arms and no legs, holding 4 human heads. The image made me think of my family and imagine that they were rotting in hell. During the ritual, I received a tattoo on my chest, right above my heart. Raymond explained that the symbol was a mark of protection and power that would connect me directly to him. The pain of the process was intense, but at the same time, I felt an indescribable euphoria. When it was all over, a new energy took over me. It was as if I had discovered an inner strength I never knew existed. My life became a cycle of excesses, limitless parties, alcohol, and drugs always within reach. With the skills and knowledge I had acquired, I was constantly at an advantage. I dressed exclusively in black and avoided any conversation about religion, keeping my true nature a secret. At the university, I led a routine of power and excesses, feeling invincible. But deep down, I knew there was still more to be explored. One day, Raymond and Margaret called me for a special meeting. There was something serious in the air, and I knew the moment was important. Raymond explained that the time had come to prove my loyalty and commitment to the sect. My task was to bring a new member to the cult, someone with potential to contribute significantly. I thought about the people I knew and finally remembered Anna, a former classmate from the university. She was shy and reserved, had never shown interest in me. I looked for her and found her working in a library. I invited her to lunch, and during the conversation, I opened up about how my life had changed since I met Raymond and Margaret. I offered to help her get a better job at my adoptive father's furniture company. Initially, she showed hesitation, but I was insistent, and she eventually accepted. That same night, I spoke with Raymond and asked him to hire Anna. The next day, she already occupied a position with a significantly better salary. Margaret began to invite her for occasional outings, and soon we became close friends. Anna's life was completely transformed. Some time later, I decided to tell her the truth. I explained about our connection to the occult sect and invited her to join us. I guaranteed that nothing bad would happen to her and that I would be by her side. When the day of the initiation ritual arrived, everything happened as in my own ritual. I helped her undress and remained by her side while the high priest conducted the process. When the raven's blood fell on her face, I knew I had completed my mission. A few days later, during dinner, Raymond became serious and solemn. He announced that it was time for me to make an important decision. Looking directly into my eyes, he asked if I was willing to offer my soul in exchange for power. The question paralyzed me. Being an occultist was already something significant, but surrendering my soul seemed a much deeper step. Margaret, trying to calm me, held my hand and explained that neither she nor Raymond had made the pact, as it wasn't necessary. Raymond reinforced that even without the agreement, he had reached a position of power as the company's director. However, he suggested that if he had accepted the pact, he could be the absolute owner. He then told me that their deceased son had accepted the pact, but didn't survive the process. His words awakened in me a mixture of fear and ambition. The idea of conquering everything I had always desired was too tempting. I decided to accept. The following night, my adoptive parents took me to the designated place. We walked for long hours in dark caves, until we reached a strange space filled with bones and lines drawn with blood on the rocks. In the center was a deep, dark well. Raymond explained that my task was to descend into the well, but I wouldn't need to go all the way to the bottom. I just had to go down as far as I could and then climb back up. However, he warned that if I let go of the rope and fell, it would be my end. For a moment, I thought about giving up, but the memory of the miserable life I had before meeting Raymond and Margaret made me continue. I decided to move forward and entered the well, holding firmly onto the rope. The darkness was oppressive. Terrible sounds began to echo around me, grinding teeth, breaking bones, deep laments and cries. My strength began to leave me, and I decided to climb back up. When I reached the top, Raymond held my hand and pierced one of my fingers. Using my blood, I drew a line on a rock. From that moment, my life changed drastically. I began to have intense and vivid nightmares where demons visited me. Anxiety took over me, and I frequently woke up in the middle of the night, hungry, unable to satisfy my hunger. The pact with him transformed everything in me. My body became stronger and more resistant, my muscles developed, and I almost never got sick. I could drink and consume drugs without negative effects, as if my body had become invulnerable. However, the psychological transformations were even more striking. Over time, the situation began to worsen. Margaret, my adoptive mother, suddenly died in her sleep, the victim of a heart attack. The impact was devastating, but I didn't have time to process the loss. Just 2 days later, Raymond also died, leaving me completely alone. A deep void began to settle in my heart. Without my adoptive parents, my life fell apart. The things that once gave me pleasure, the company of women, exquisite foods, lost all meaning. Moving away from the sect brought no relief. On the contrary, it intensified the loneliness. The nights continued to be haunted by the same demons that visited me in dreams, tormenting me with an insatiable hunger and anxiety that gave me no respite. I tried several times to end my existence, but I always failed. The bullets jammed, the ropes broke, the car wouldn't start. It was as if not even my own death was under my control. Finally, I sold the house and began living in hotels. Margaret's life insurance and Raymond's inheritance gave me a considerable fortune, but no amount of money could fill the void that inhabited my heart. It was then that I understood there was no way out. The pact I had made imprisoned me in an existence of endless suffering. No matter how much I tried to escape, the demons would always find me. There was no redemption, no relief, only emptiness and darkness. My life became a constant test of my physical and mental resistance. I learned to live with my demons, accepting the fate I chose. I have no hope for a better life, only the certainty that one day, when my body finally succumbs, I will find the rest I so desire. Until then, I will continue in this dark existence, remembering at every moment the fatal mistake I made by making that pact with the devil. Of all the stories I've carried with me through life, there's one that haunts me still, a tale of ancient forces and mysteries that defy explanation. It comes from my grandfather, a man who lived among mountains and secrets, facing powers beyond our comprehension. My name is Andrew, and I want to share a story my grandfather Robert told me. Grandpa Robert was a man who never surrendered to life's hardships. Growing up, I listened to his youthful adventures, like when he faced the wilderness alone without fear, always saying those remote places were where he truly felt at home. Among all his stories, there was one he shared with me just once. It happened on a bitter winter night, while the wind howled fiercely, and fog devoured our small town in the Appalachian Mountains. I've never forgotten that narrative, and whenever I recall it, an inevitable shiver runs through me. That evening, my grandfather had a rare, profound, and distant look, as if reliving something that had marked him deeply. He told me everything happened in the 1970s, in a remote village lost among the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It was an isolated place, nearly untouched by the outside world. In those days, ominous stories circulated among residents, tales of mysterious apparitions, strange creatures, and treacherous mist that made anyone who dared venture into it disappear. My grandfather arrived at this settlement after going through difficult times. He said he had lost someone very dear and sought refuge in the mountain solitude for his grief. He wanted distance from everything and everyone. Little was known about him back then, and being a child, I never asked the locals many questions. To the villagers, Robert was just an outsider who preferred the mountain's quietude to the simple, yet bustling life of the settlement. He became a fisherman at the lake near the village, a place shrouded in mystery. The locals said the lake was haunted. Strange figures appeared above its waters on misty nights. It wasn't a place to be after nightfall, but my grandfather, naturally skeptical, always thought these were merely stories to frighten the impressionable. One October night, under the clear, full moonlight, Robert decided to go fishing. It was a freezing night, and mist began to spread like a white blanket over the lake. While other fishermen avoided these conditions, he, stubborn as always, decided nothing would make him retreat. He prepared his boat, his nets, and headed toward the center of the dark, silent waters. At first, everything seemed peaceful. The mist enveloped him, but he could still see the moon's reflection on the lake's calm surface. The only sound was that of oars cutting through water. But as he advanced, the fog thickened, and the lake seemed to extend indefinitely, as if he had crossed into another dimension. The mountains disappeared from view, and he could only see a few yards ahead. That's when a strange sound emerged. Initially, he thought it was just the wind blowing through trees, but there was something different, like a distant murmur coming from within the mist, growing ever closer. He raised his lantern trying to see something, but all he found was the opaque white of the fog and the heavy silence accompanying it. At that moment, he felt an unusual chill, something he rarely experienced. For a brief instant, he considered turning back. Suddenly, the silence was broken by something breaching the water's surface. My grandfather looked around, trying to identify what it was, but couldn't see anything. The sound repeated, now closer, as if something was lurking from the depths. With his heart racing, he gripped the oar and struck the water forcefully, hoping to drive away whatever it was. The sound echoed through the mist, but soon silence returned, heavy and suffocating, as if the lake itself was waiting. Trying to stay calm, my grandfather decided it was time to return to shore. However, when he tried to row back, he noticed the boat was resisting, as if being pulled toward the lake's center by an invisible force. He thought at first it might be a hidden current, but the waters were still and motionless. Even so, the boat continued advancing, carried by something he couldn't comprehend. That's when he saw them, a few yards away, two luminous points emerging in the mist. They were large yellow eyes, hovering in the air and fixed on him. A cutting cold ran through his body, and fear paralyzed him. It wasn't something he could identify as a common animal. Those eyes belonged to something older, a presence that seemed part of the mountains themselves, observing him with a disturbing combination of curiosity and voraciousness. He tried to react, but his muscles wouldn't obey. It was as if the gaze of those eyes had bewitched him, trapping him in a trance. Suddenly he heard a murmur, a deep, smooth voice that seemed to come from the bottom of the lake. The voice called him by name, repeating, "Robert." Robert, the sound carried no emotion. It wasn't friendly or threatening. It just echoed insistently, as if wanting him to listen. Trembling, my grandfather managed to close his eyes with effort, breaking the spell that held him. He took a deep breath and began to pray quietly, repeating the prayers his mother had taught him. Each word, though almost a whisper, resonated in the mist, gaining strength in the silence. When he opened his eyes again, the bright points had disappeared. The fog, however, still surrounded the boat, dense and suffocating, and he felt the presence around him, as if something continued there, waiting. Without hesitation, he began to row with all his might, trying to escape. Gradually, the mist began to dissipate, revealing in the distance the familiar shadows of the mountains. He accelerated even more, feeling the relief of leaving that place behind. Still, he had the sensation that whatever it was had let him go for unknown reasons. Upon reaching the shore, my grandfather didn't say a word. He went home in silence, exhausted, his body still trembling with fear. The next day, he tried to convince himself it was all an illusion caused by solitude and fatigue. But whenever he closed his eyes, the two yellow eyes returned to his mind, watching him as a reminder that he had witnessed something not of this world. After that night, Robert never fished again after dark. He changed. He was no longer the confident, serene man everyone knew. Even trying to lead a normal life, those who knew him well noticed something within him had broken. He himself confessed in moments of distress that he could feel those eyes even in daylight, hidden in the mountain shadows, somewhere he could never reach. Weeks passed before my grandfather mustered the courage to approach the lake again. His absence didn't go unnoticed by the villagers. Intrigued, some neighbors went to ask what had happened, but true to his reserved nature, he revealed nothing of what he had experienced that night. Nevertheless, stories began to circulate. They said bright eyes appeared in the mist, and rumors that the lake was haunted spread quickly. Some believed a dark spirit inhabited its depths. That autumn, the mist seemed thicker than ever. During nights, a strange, suffocating silence took over the village, as if the air held a secret no one dared unveil. Families avoided going out after sunset, and there were many occasions when people said the lake glowed faintly on full moon nights, as if a mysterious light emanated from its waters. One afternoon, while working in nearby fields, my grandfather met Thomas, an old acquaintance in the village known for his stories about the mountain mysteries. Noticing my grandfather's haggard appearance, Thomas approached. "Robert, has something happened?" he asked with a calm but firm voice. My grandfather tried to smile, but the gesture came out twisted, almost like a grimace. "I saw something, Thomas," he finally confessed, releasing the words he had carried with him. "At the lake, enormous eyes that watched me in the mist. I've never felt such fear." Thomas listened attentively, and in his gaze was something of understanding, as if he had been expecting this. "I knew that sooner or later you would end up encountering them," said the elder, with a tone that seemed to carry years of secrets. "This lake is not like others, Robert. There are things in these mountains that belong to worlds we no longer understand." Confused, my grandfather furrowed his brow. "But what are these eyes, Thomas?" "Some animal, a spirit." The old man sighed deeply, and his eyes seemed to dive into distant memories. "Those eyes belong to the guardian of the mist, or of the lake, if you prefer. It's an ancient entity, something that has inhabited those waters longer than we can imagine. They say it protects something hidden in the depths. Nobody knows what it is, but all who have encountered it agree there's a connection between this eternal entity and nature itself." My grandfather listened in silence, feeling he was being drawn more and more into a world he could barely begin to comprehend. "But why me, Thomas? Why did it look at me?" Thomas regarded him with a mixture of sadness and respect. Sometimes the ancient spirits choose those capable of seeing beyond what is human. Perhaps you've been chosen for something you can't understand yet. But be careful, Robert. The guardian of the mist doesn't forgive those who get too close. Those words left my grandfather even more restless. He felt himself enveloped by something invisible, something that both attracted and frightened him. Despite the fear, There was within him an almost irresistible desire to return to the lake, to face those eyes again, and unravel the secret hidden at the bottom of those waters. A week later, the village was shaken by a tragedy. Michael, a young fisherman who had the habit of going out at night, was found dead at the lake's edge. His boat was empty, and the expression of pure terror on his face left everyone horrified. Soon whispers began. They said the guardian of the mist had taken him, a punishment for having invaded the forbidden territory. That night, my grandfather couldn't sleep. The image of Michael, with horror-stricken eyes, wouldn't leave his mind. He felt he needed to act, that he was the only one capable of understanding what had really happened. Since the day he had seen the yellow eyes, he knew the guardian of the mist had chosen him, and if anyone should confront it, it would be him. At sunrise, he returned to the lake. This time he left behind his nets and tools, taking only himself. He walked to the shore where the mist was beginning to rise, covering the water with a thick, white veil. His heart was pounding, but something greater was guiding him. It was as if an invisible force pushed him forward, a silent determination. He stood there, watching the lake and feeling the cold, damp mist penetrate his skin. He waited until he saw them again. The same yellow eyes emerged in the distance, fixed on him, exactly as they had the first time. But this time, fear didn't come. In its place, a deep sadness took over, as if those eyes carried an ancient pain, something my grandfather couldn't decipher. And then, as if the guardian were responding to his thoughts, the voice echoed again in his mind, distant. "Robert, why have you returned?" With a trembling but determined sigh, my grandfather responded, "I want to understand who you are and what you want from us." The mist around began to stir, forming vague shadows, figures that seemed to dance in silence to the rhythm of something invisible. "I am the guardian of what was and what will be," the voice responded. "I protect the secrets that inhabit these waters and the destinies of those who dare to defy them. You are one of them, Robert. You crossed the boundary and now are part of this place." My grandfather shuddered, but his determination kept him firm. He needed to know more. "Why, Michael? Why did you take the young fisherman?" The eyes shone weaker for an instant, and the voice responded with a grave tone that seemed to freeze the air around. Michael disrespected the lake's rules, ignored the pact, and sought beyond what was permitted. Those who challenge what is hidden face the consequences. Only those who approach with humility and reverence can cross without danger. These words brought my grandfather a mixture of relief and dread. He understood now that he had been on the verge of the same fate that night, when he first saw the eyes. But there was still something he needed to know, something that tormented him. Why me? Why was I chosen? What must I do to honor this place and its mysteries? The mist around began to dissipate slowly as the voice, now more distant, answered. "You are one of the few who still listen, Robert, one of those who still understands the language of the ancient. Protect this wisdom. Don't let what lives in these lands be forgotten." With these words, the presence disappeared, leaving only the silence of the lake and the mist slowly fading away. My grandfather remained there for some time more, processing everything he had heard, before finally walking away with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions that might never be answered. With these final words, the eyes vanished into the mist, and the lake returned to its usual state. However, my grandfather remained there, immobile, carrying the sensation of having witnessed something sacred and ancestral, something that enveloped him with a responsibility that went far beyond his own life. When he returned to the village that day, his serenity was evident, in complete contrast to the weeks of torment he had lived before. It was as if he had reached a kind of reconciliation with something deep and enigmatic. Still, the weight of that experience remained visible in his features. From that moment, his relationship with the lake and the mountains changed. He began to treat these places with a reverence that didn't exist before. He was often seen standing, observing the mist that covered the lake at dusk, as if searching for something only he could understand. The villagers also noticed the change. While some believed he had lost his mind, others, especially the elders, saw in the transformation something almost spiritual. In the village, legends and stories of ancient spirits were still part of daily life. The elders spoke of guardians and beings that protected the mountain's recesses. For someone who had always been skeptical, my grandfather was beginning to find an unexpected meaning in all this. That's when something unusual happened. One night, while everyone slept, an anguished cry echoed from the lake. It was an inhuman sound, long and desperate, that awakened the village in panic. No one dared leave their homes on misty nights. Any shadow was capable of fueling the worst fears, and the unknown kept everyone locked in their houses. The following morning, with the sun already high and the village calmer, some fishermen found a disturbing scene. The lake's edge was full of enormous footprints, different from any known mark. They were deep, as if a gigantic animal had walked through the area. The footprints led to the lake and disappeared into the water, as if the creature had returned to the depths. When he heard about the incident, my grandfather rushed to the location. He stood before the marks on the ground, analyzing every detail as if he could understand something no one else could. He said nothing, but his expression revealed respect and concern. That afternoon, he gathered some of the elders and called for a meeting in the village's small church. Intrigued, people attended without knowing exactly what to expect. When everyone was present, my grandfather began to relate his experience at the lake with a gravity that silenced everyone. He told them about the eyes in the mist, the guardian's voice, and the pact mentioned by the entity. Most listened in silence, between fear and curiosity. Some maintained skepticism, but the elders listened attentively, as if those words awakened memories of something they already knew. After my grandfather's account, Thomas, one of the most respected elders, spoke. Known for his knowledge of local traditions, he spoke calmly and clearly. Long ago, before this village was as it is today, our ancestors maintained a tradition. He began in a reflective tone. Periodically, they gathered at the lake's edge and made an offering to the guardian of the mist. It was a way to show respect and acknowledge that there is something beyond us, something that must be honored and remembered. As Thomas spoke, the silence in the small church seemed to grow, and everyone felt the weight of the words, as if an ancient bond with the lake was being restored. My grandfather nodded, and at that moment, everyone understood what needed to be done. They decided that at nightfall, a ceremony would be held in honor of the guardian. The news spread quickly, and when darkness took over the village, the residents gathered at the lake's edge. They carried candles, flowers, and simple foods as offerings. The mist descended slowly, covering the lake with a dense cloak, creating an atmosphere charged with mystery. Guided by something that seemed to come from the depths of the mountains, my grandfather walked to the lake's edge, holding a lit candle. He raised it and with a strong, determined voice began to speak as if conversing directly with the guardian. Guardian, spirit of these waters, watcher of the mist, we come to you to honor your presence. These offerings are a symbol of our respect and gratitude. We know you are here, protecting and watching over this place. We ask that you accept this gesture and allow us to live in harmony without disturbing the secrets you guard in the depths. His words echoed in the quietude, and the silence that followed was so intense it seemed to hold everyone's breath. All eyes were fixed on the lake, waiting for something, anything that would show the guardian had listened. Then a faint glow appeared in the center of the lake, dancing through the mist. At first, it was just a shy light, but soon it intensified, taking the form of a luminous figure. No one had any doubts. They were the same yellow eyes my grandfather had described. The eyes hovered for a few moments, facing the crowd, evaluating them in silence, then slowly disappeared, swallowed by the mist. Everyone remained motionless, fearful of even moving. What they had seen was real, and none of them dared question it. Some began to murmur low prayers, while others deposited their offerings at the lake's edge in silence, with slow, reverent gestures. That night, the village inhabitants returned home, feeling something different. The fear previously present began to give way to a strange peace, as if the balance had been restored. My grandfather became a respected figure among the residents. They said he had a unique connection with the lake and the secrets it hid. Over time, the ceremony became an annual tradition, an event where the village gathered to remember they were not alone, that there was something ancient and grand watching over the mountains and the lake. As a child, I had the opportunity to participate in one of these ceremonies alongside my grandfather. I remember well the tension hanging in the air, the candles flickering on the water's surface, and the prayers whispered by those present. Even aged, my grandfather continued to lead the ceremony with impressive strength. When he raised his candle that night and pronounced his words to the lake, I felt there was a deep connection between him and that place. He seemed to be part of the mist's mystery, as if his soul was connected to that guardian who silently watched over everyone. I never saw the eyes in the mist, but I grew up with the certainty they were there, caring for and watching over those who respected their presence. And now, even without my grandfather among us, each time the mist covers the lake, I remember him, his firm words and his resolute gaze. I think especially of the night when, without fear, he faced the unknown and understood that in these mountains, there are secrets that should never be forgotten. Losing someone is more than just dealing with their absence. It's confronting the weight of memories and how they transform what we feel about the past and present. This story runs deep, filled with emotions that go beyond what words can express. My name is Sarah. I should warn you that I'm still processing everything that happened, but I need to share this. The weight of keeping it inside has become too much to bear. It was about 5 years ago, during a crisp autumn evening in Vermont. I received a call from my Aunt Rebecca that shattered my world. My father had been struck by a logging truck on one of those winding mountain roads near Stowe. He was alive, but in critical condition, at the regional medical center. I immediately packed a bag and called my brothers. David agreed to drive with me from our home in Rochester, New York. The 5-hour journey felt like an eternity as we navigated through the night, my mind racing with every possible outcome. When we arrived at the hospital, the fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell hit me like a physical force. My father lay in the ICU, his body broken but his spirit somehow intact. The doctors explained the extent of his injuries: a shattered pelvis held together with metal pins, a fractured spine, and his right leg broken in 4 places. Despite everything, when he saw us, his eyes lit up. "Don't worry, kiddo," he whispered through cracked lips, attempting a smile. "Tough old trees don't fall easy." He laughed, but I caught a flicker of fear in his eyes that he tried to hide. The medical team was cautiously optimistic. The lead trauma surgeon explained that after a week of stabilization, they would perform another surgery, and he should recover, though the rehabilitation would be lengthy. We stayed for 3 days before returning home to gather more clothes and bring my younger brother Jacob, who was desperate to see our father. We had barely spent 1 night back in Rochester when my phone rang at 3 in the morning. The hospital's number appeared on my screen, and I felt a chill run through my body before I even answered. My father had passed away, an undetected pulmonary embolism, blood clots in his lungs that no one had caught during the initial examinations. I believe it was negligence, plain and simple. The accident had happened during the Columbus Day weekend, and the attending physician who had been overseeing his case had gone on vacation afterward, leaving my father primarily in the care of the nursing staff. But there was something even more unsettling. Before he died, my Aunt Rebecca told me that my father had mentioned seeing my mother and my uncle, a minister, praying by his bedside. Rebecca found this strange because my mother rarely traveled to that part of the country and had been divorced from my father for over a decade. Still, she didn't question him, not wanting to upset him in his condition. When Rebecca called to ask if my mother was in Vermont, I told her no. She was sitting right across from me in our kitchen in Rochester. That's when we realized that perhaps due to decreasing oxygen levels, he had experienced some kind of vision. The thought that he died believing the love of his life was there, when in reality he was alone, crushed me even further. After that call, I remember freezing in place, then collapsing into uncontrollable sobs in my mother's arms. I had left my father stable in the hospital, and now he was gone. With a shattered heart, I informed my brothers. David drove us back to Vermont because I was in no condition to drive. My eyes constantly filled with tears, making the road ahead a blur. Upon arriving, we held a wake for 2 days. Those were the darkest days of my life. Seeing my father laid out in a casket, lifeless, touching his cold hands, it was an indescribable blow. Outwardly, I tried to appear strong, but inside, the pain seemed unbearable. I arranged everything with the funeral home for my father to be cremated in Burlington. After finalizing the details, they explained that transportation would be handled by their service, and I would need to be present in Burlington to identify him before cremation. It was difficult to witness his body leaving Stowe. My brother wanted to accompany me, But I chose to do this alone. The funeral home assured me everything would proceed smoothly, but each detail only made me relive the agony of loss. When I saw him for the final time, I broke down, saying goodbye the only way I knew how, kissing his hands and cheeks, embracing him, knowing it would be the last time I would ever touch him. Afterward, I returned to Rochester. 2 weeks later, I was notified that his ashes were ready. That's when I plunged into a profound depression. I drank and cried every day, clutching his ashes and clothes, as if they could somehow fill the void he left behind. I lived like this for 7 months. I would often wake up screaming, crying, and calling out for him. My mother would rush into my room to try and calm me, but all I could do was ask, "Why, Mom?" "Why, Dad?" She tried to comfort me, but it was hard for her to see me in such a state. She feared I was losing my grip on reality. I abandoned my job as a graphic designer. My life consisted solely of grieving and drinking. I prayed to God to allow me to see and embrace him just once more. In my desperation, I even purchased a Ouija board, believing I could communicate with him. Naturally, I never succeeded. Sometimes other spirits seemed to manifest, but I knew they weren't him. I had ways of testing them, and even though they might answer some questions, it was clear to me they weren't my father. One evening, I returned from the liquor store, and my mother, exhausted from watching my downward spiral, reprimanded me for continuing to drink. She was clearly suffering too, but I ignored her and went to my room. As soon as I opened the door, I froze. My father was sitting on my bed, his back to me, gazing out the window at the maple tree he had planted when I was born. My body went cold. I tried to convince myself it was the alcohol, the grief, or my mind playing tricks. I wanted to rush in and embrace him, but something deep inside told me that wasn't my father. I knew I had lost him months ago. My mother, noticing my reaction, came to see what was happening. When she stopped beside me and also saw the figure, I clearly remember her expression of terror. She lost her breath and gently closed the door, tears streaming down her face. I don't know if it was fear, sadness, or both. She hugged me tightly and said, "That's not your father, Sarah. That's not something good. Let him rest in peace. He can't move on because you won't let him go. Your father would never want to see you like this. What would he say if he saw how you're living now?" Those words and that apparition awakened something in me. I decided to stop drinking and return to work. My mother and I created a small memorial altar for my father, placing his ashes, photographs, and a candle there. We prayed for him, asking that he find peace. With time, I came to understand that sometimes grief is so overwhelming that we unintentionally prevent those who have passed from finding rest. The greatest act of love can be letting go, even when every fiber of your being wants to hold on. My name is Jackson, and I'm 43 years old. I was born in rural Kentucky, but I've been living in Seattle for many years now. My life's journey took a sharp turn when I lost my father, and my mother decided to return to our hometown. Still young at the time, I chose to stay in the city to build my own life. I started early as a rideshare driver, and initially, everything seemed like an enormous challenge. With time, though, I carved out my place. Passengers enjoyed riding with me because I always offered pleasant conversation and a welcoming smile. This job gave me the opportunity to meet countless people and hear their life stories. I was married once, but the marriage didn't work out and we separated. I don't have children, so driving became my constant companion. Even on my own, I found satisfaction in what I did. Every morning, I'd wake up early and head into the city, looking for passengers and taking them to their destinations. It was during these routines that I began to notice Eliza, my neighbor. She was an enchanting woman with flowing auburn hair and a smile that lit up everything around her. Every morning, I'd see her walking her children to school. I couldn't help the fascination I felt for her. But Eliza was married to a man who, from what I observed, didn't treat her well. He was crude, often aggressive, and perpetually ill-tempered. As much as my heart insisted on thinking about her, I knew our lives were separate. Eliza had her reality, and I had mine. Still, I couldn't stop imagining how things would be if they were different, if she could be by my side. But I knew all this was nothing more than a distant desire. My life continued at an almost predictable pace until the day I met Juliet. She appeared unexpectedly and led me to a place that would completely change my story. Each day driving started the same way. I woke before dawn with the city still silent and headed out for my shift. Being a rideshare driver was always unpredictable, with varied encounters and unexpected stories. Some passengers liked to talk nonstop, others were more reserved. But everyone had something to say, and I enjoyed listening. However, the highlight of my mornings was seeing Eliza. Whenever I left my apartment building, I'd cross paths with her, walking her children to school. Eliza had a delicate yet striking presence, with her auburn hair and eyes that carried a mixture of melancholy and hope. When she smiled, it seemed to illuminate the entire day. I couldn't understand how someone so gentle and caring could live with such an unpleasant man. It was painful to watch the rude way he treated her, often yelling or publicly humiliating her. This awakened a deep anger in me, mixed with a desire to protect her. Gradually, I began creating situations to encounter her. If she was leaving, I'd slow my pace or pretend to be checking my car, just to observe her for another moment. Sometimes our gazes would meet, and she'd give me a shy smile that brightened my entire day. I felt there was something between us, even though neither of us spoke about it. Against my better judgment, I began to imagine a future where we would be together. I thought about how I could bring happiness to her life, how we could create a family far from that man who made her suffer. Every night as I returned home, these fantasies accompanied me. I dreamed of Eliza, with the idea that one day she could be mine. But deep down, I knew this was nothing more than a dream. Eliza was trapped in a reality difficult to change, and I had to accept that, no matter how much it hurt. My fascination with Eliza grew with each moment. It was inevitable. I felt in my core that there was something unique about her, as if our paths were connected by an invisible thread. As much as I tried to convince myself to leave her alone, my mind insisted on returning to her. So between my work and these thoughts, the days dragged on one after another until something unexpected happened. It was a routine morning. I woke up early, prepared my coffee, and started my car. I was already on the streets looking for passengers. while my mind wandered to Eliza when a woman got into my car. She seemed distressed and carried an uneasiness in her eyes. "I need you to take me to this address as quickly as possible," she requested, handing me a paper with the destination written on it. Reading the address, I immediately recognized the area. It was one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Seattle, known for its stories of violence and abandonment. A chill ran down my spine, but along with it came a curiosity I couldn't avoid. "Miss, are you sure about this? This place is extremely risky. Going there could be dangerous," I warned, hoping she would reconsider. She nodded firmly. "I'm absolutely certain. It's something very important. You can charge whatever is necessary, but I need to get there." Without further arguments, I put the car in motion and we headed toward the neighborhood. When we arrived, I was faced with a deteriorated house that seemed on the verge of collapse. Outside, a line of people waited to enter. Juliet, that was her name, paid the fare and asked me to wait. "Please wait here. I'll compensate you for the time you spend," she said before disappearing into the crowd. I parked right there, and with nothing better to do, I settled in and began leafing through some old magazines I kept in the car. Time seemed to drag on. Almost an hour and a half later, Juliet returned, now with a more serene expression, and asked me to take her back. On the way, I couldn't hold back my curiosity. "What exactly is in that house?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She sketched a smile and answered without hesitation. "Madame Rosetta lives there. She's a famous spiritualist. She does all kinds of work, from solving health problems to matters of love. When no one else can help, she helps." Her words kept hammering in my head. I'd always had my doubts about these things, but something in the confidence with which Juliet spoke left me intrigued. "And do you believe she can really help with anything?" I asked, trying to disguise my growing interest. "Absolutely. If you need help in love, for instance, she's the right person. Just tell her you're coming on Juliet's recommendation, daughter of Clara." I kept that information like a valuable secret. After dropping her off at her destination, Juliet's words wouldn't leave my head. Could Madame Rosetta really help me with Eliza? It seemed like an absurd idea, but the possibility haunted me. Days passed, and I continued to mull over this idea until, on a Saturday morning, I decided I had nothing to lose. I took my car and went to Madame Rosetta's house, curious to discover if Juliet was telling the truth. When I arrived, there was the line, people waiting patiently, each with their need and hope. I joined the line, anxious for my turn. Madame Rosetta was a short, elderly woman, but with a vitality that seemed to defy time. Her intense eyes analyzed me as soon as I entered, and with a discreet gesture, she indicated where I should sit. "What brings you here, my child?" she asked in a calm voice, yet filled with firmness. With a mixture of nervousness and hope, I told her about Eliza, about my feelings, and my desire to be by her side. Madame Rosetta listened to everything in silence, just nodding her head from time to time. When I finished, she looked at me seriously, as if weighing each word she would say. "If this is what you truly desire, know that there will be a price. Magic is not something simple, and its consequences always appear," she warned clearly. Even with her words, my determination remained firm. Following her instructions, I wrote my desires for Eliza on a piece of paper. Madame Rosetta then began a ritual, burning the paper and storing the ashes in a small black bag. "Take this," she said, handing me the little bag. "Scatter the ashes in a special place. She will be with you, but remember, never break your promise, or the price will be high." I left that house with my heart racing, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and apprehension. Everything seemed surreal, but at the same time, I couldn't contain the expectation. From that moment on, my life took a turn I could never have imagined. The following days maintained the same rhythm as always. However, every time I saw Eliza, it was impossible not to feel that something different was about to happen. The idea that the seeds of a new story had been planted stirred me. Then, on an apparently ordinary morning, as I was adjusting my car for another day of work, I heard desperate knocks on my door. Opening it, I found Eliza accompanied by her younger son. Her face was pale, and her eyes were swollen from so much crying. Her trembling voice revealed a desperation that cut through my heart. "Jackson, I'm sorry to show up like this, but I have no one else to turn to," she began, and a tear ran down her face. "My husband died yesterday in a workplace accident. I need help to handle the funeral arrangements. My family and friends abandoned me, and I don't know what to do." My chest tightened seeing her pain, but at the same time, I realized this was my chance to be by her side. "Eliza, don't worry. I'm here for whatever you need. Get in the car. We'll work this out together," I responded, trying to sound confident and offer some comfort. On the way, Eliza told me the details of the accident. Her husband, who worked as a quality inspector at a factory, had been crushed by poorly stored machinery. The authorities showed her images so she could make the identification, which only increased her suffering. Her tears fell nonstop, and my heart was divided between compassion for her and anger for what she had experienced. I accompanied Eliza throughout the entire process at the funeral home, helping her with forms and supporting her as she spoke with the staff. Her strength amid the pain impressed me and increased my admiration for her even more. After the funeral, our lives began to intersect more frequently. Naturally, Eliza, always grateful for my help, gradually opened up to me. Each moment by her side seemed to strengthen our bond even more. One morning, while we were having coffee together after taking the children to school, I decided it was time to reveal what I felt. "Eliza, I need to tell you something important," I began, with my heart racing. "I know it's still recent, and perhaps it's not the ideal moment, but I can't keep this to myself anymore. I like you much more than you can imagine. I want to be by your side, take care of you, and make you happy. I want to be someone who can truly love you." To my surprise, Eliza didn't back away. On the contrary, she firmly held my hands, and with tears in her eyes, looked at me deeply. "Jackson, you have been an indescribable strength for me, and for my children too. I realize I feel something very intense for you. At first I thought it was wrong, but now I'm certain. I want to be by your side too." We embraced tightly, and our first kiss sealed what seemed to be a relief for everything we had faced until that moment. It was as if the universe had led us to that instant, full of love and hope. From that day on, our relationship began to grow. Even with the doubts we carried, we knew it was the beginning of something special. But it soon became clear that our path wouldn't be so simple. inexplicable events started to happen, and a disquieting doubt settled in. Was the spirit of Eliza's deceased husband really at peace? Eliza and I began to build our life together. Being with her seemed like a dream come true, as if I had finally found the place where I belonged. However, we quickly realized that our happiness was far from being easy. It all started with seemingly small things. One night, while we were dining at her house, the living room lamp exploded without any explanation. The noise startled us so much that we almost fell off our chairs. We tried to ignore it, but an uncomfortable presentiment began to grow in both of us. 2 days later, we were watching television when a picture suddenly fell from the wall. There was no wind, nor anything that would justify it. Eliza looked at me full of concern, and I realized she also felt something was wrong. Things became even more disturbing when we started to hear knocks on the door during the early morning. They were gentle but insistent knocks, as if someone wanted to get our attention. Each time we opened the door, however, there was no one there. Eliza began to become visibly frightened, and this started to affect our peace. One night, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. We were paralyzed, listening attentively. The footsteps approached the room and stopped in front of the door. I took a deep breath and with courage opened it suddenly, but there was no one there. The chill I felt was indescribable. Something invisible was there with us. Then came the dream. In it, Eliza's deceased husband appeared with a look full of fury. He accused me of having destroyed his family, saying he would never rest and would do everything to separate us. I woke up in panic, in a cold sweat, with the feeling that this wasn't just a dream. I decided to seek out Madame Rosetta again. I needed answers. I went back to her house and reported all the events. She listened to me with the same attention as before, but her countenance was more serious. Jackson, anything of this kind brings consequences. This man's spirit is restless. He feels he lost what was his and is trying to protect it. You need to be very careful, she said with a tone of warning. Her words left me apprehensive, but also determined. I wouldn't let anything or anyone drive Eliza away from me. Madame Rosetta gave me an amulet and taught me some prayers, saying they could help calm the restless spirit. I returned home with a mixture of fear and hope. I knew I was facing something beyond what I could understand, but I also knew I wouldn't give up on Eliza. I arrived home and shared with Eliza everything Madame Rosetta had told me. We decided to follow her advice and face together, whatever it might be. But the supernatural phenomena didn't stop. One night, while we were lying down, we felt a presence in the room. The air turned icy, and the lights began to flicker. It was then that we saw in the corner of the room the silhouette of Eliza's husband. His gaze overflowed with hatred. Eliza wept desperately, while I struggled to contain my own fear. "Leave us in peace," I shouted with all the strength I could gather, but the figure remained motionless. The memory of the prayers Madame Rosetta taught me came to mind, and I began to recite them aloud. Little by little, the figure began to disappear, as if dissipating in the air. When it finally vanished, Eliza and I embraced, relieved but still terrified. Even with the decrease in supernatural events, we felt his spirit still lurked around us, watching, waiting. Despite this, we continued with our life. We got engaged and planned a simple wedding, full of expectation for the future. I worked exhaustively, doubling my shifts as much as I could. I wanted to give Eliza and her children everything they deserved. No matter how exhausting the days were, Eliza's smile always made everything worthwhile. But fate seemed to have other plans. One night, I received a request from a regular client. He urgently needed to travel to a neighboring city. It was already late, but I accepted the good payment. I picked up the passenger, and we set off down the deserted highway. My client was a friendly and talkative man. The conversation flowed, making the trip lighter. When we reached the destination, he paid me generously, and before leaving, he left a warning that chilled me to the bone. "Be careful on the way back. I have a bad feeling," he said with a look that seemed to carry an unusual weight. I thanked him and began the return. Fatigue began to dominate me. The silence in the car was crushing, and no matter how hard I tried to stay alert, drinking water and opening the windows, sleep was gradually overtaking me. Then the car lights began to flicker. The air turned cold as ice, and I felt a presence in the passenger seat. I glanced sideways and saw the dark figure of Eliza's husband, the same hate-filled gaze fixed on me. My body was paralyzed with fear. Before I could react, I lost control of the steering wheel. The car skidded and went off the road, rolling until it fell into a ditch. The sound of twisting metal mingled with the pain that took over me. It was the last thing I remember before losing consciousness. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My body was wrapped in bandages, and a constant pain throbbed in every part of me. Only then did I realize the extent of what had happened. I had lost my legs in the accident. The physical pain was excruciating, but nothing compared to the emotional void. I knew my life would never be the same again. In moments of solitude and pain, I began to revisit each choice that led me there. I remembered Madame Rosetta's words, her warnings about the consequences of meddling with the unknown. Only then did I realize how naive I was to play with forces I didn't understand. Everything I did to be with Eliza seemed insignificant in the face of the immense loss I now faced. I thought constantly of Eliza and the impact my new reality would have on her and her children. I didn't want to be a burden to them, a shadow of what I had been. Eliza came to the hospital every day, bringing with her a look that mixed love and sadness. She insisted that my condition changed nothing, that she loved me and wanted to stay by my side. But I knew the future would be difficult. On a quiet morning, I gathered the courage to say what was in my heart. "Eliza, I can't do this to you. I can't be a burden to you and your children. You deserve a better life without carrying this weight," I said, trying to keep my voice firm as tears fell. Eliza cried, begging me to reconsider, but my decision was already made. I knew that leaving her was, paradoxically, an act of love. Now I live in a small rented room, supporting myself as best I can by selling handmade crafts on the streets. It's a humble life, but enough to continue on. I spend much of my time reflecting on the choices I made, on how seeking mystical help gave me what I desired, but at a cost I never imagined paying. I try to find some kind of peace amid the memories, but it always seems to escape me. Despite everything, I still nurture the hope that Eliza will find the happiness she always deserved. My new routine is simple. Every morning I wake up early as before. But now, instead of starting my car, I prepare my small craft stand. I work on busy streets where unknown faces mix, and the day passes slowly. At night, when silence takes over the city, my thoughts always return to Eliza and what we could have lived together. One day, while I was at a corner selling my crafts, I spotted a familiar figure. It was the woman who had taken me to Madame Rosetta. She recognized me immediately and approached, surprised. "Jackson, I can't believe it's you." "What happened?" she asked with an expression of genuine concern. I told her everything, the accident, the decision to distance myself from Eliza, my current life. Juliet listened to every word attentively, nodding her head from time to time. When I finished, she took a deep breath before speaking. "Jackson, you did what you thought was right at the time, but you can't remain trapped in what happened. You need to find a purpose, something that gives you a reason to move forward," she said with a clarity that caught me by surprise. Those words resonated deeply within me. I realized I was living in a kind of limbo, divided between regret for the past and apathy for the present. Juliet made me understand that I needed more than just to survive. I decided it was time to seek something that would bring new meaning to my life, something that would allow me to move forward. With the passing of time, I began to dedicate my energy to helping people who faced challenges similar to mine. I started visiting hospitals and rehabilitation centers, sharing my story with those who needed support. I discovered that by offering words of encouragement and sharing my experiences, I also found a way to alleviate my own pain. Life remained difficult, but amid this, I discovered a new strength within me. I understood that despite the painful choices I made, they brought me to this point and shaped who I am now. I still missed Eliza, but I knew deep down that my decision to leave her was the right thing to do. My journey, as hard as it has been, became a great lesson. I learned that meddling with what we don't completely understand can have disastrous consequences. But I also learned that even in the darkest moments, it's possible to find a way out. Sometimes this requires accepting the mistakes of the past, drawing lessons from them, and moving forward. Today, as I move through the city streets in my wheelchair, I feel that my life has a different meaning. It's no longer about lamenting what I lost, but valuing what I can do for others. This gives me a peace that for a long time I sought without finding. Good evening. My name is Sarah. Recently, while listening to a horror podcast, I heard an intriguing question posed at the end. They asked if we'd ever heard about the idea of never asking for the time while dreaming. I know many people might think dreams are just dreams and nothing more matters, but I wish that were true in my case. This phenomenon continues to happen to me, even today. They say that when you ask for the time while aware you're dreaming, the figures present in your dream begin to pursue you and won't let you leave. I always thought this idea was exaggerated and never truly believed it. But I found it curious, since it's not something people commonly do. Still, I was intrigued to see what would happen if I tried. I decided that the next time I had a lucid dream, I would test this theory. However, it took months for me to succeed, because usually when I realize I'm dreaming, I end up waking. I remember in vivid detail the dream where it all began. I was in my grandmother's lakeside cabin in Maine, preparing dinner with her. The windows revealed a peaceful scene outside, tall pines swaying gently in the autumn breeze. It felt nostalgic, a memory from my childhood summers. I took a while to realize I was dreaming, but when I did, I decided to look at the antique wall clock. Strangely, the numbers were blurred. I could see the ornate hands moving, but the numerals made no sense. The rest of the environment was clear and vivid, so I decided to check my phone, but it wasn't with me. I searched my pockets but couldn't find it. Finally, I decided to ask my grandmother. She was pulling something from the old cast-iron stove, using thick quilted mitts to protect her hands from a hot baking dish. When I asked her what time it was, she looked at me and responded, "Why do you want to know that?" I found her reaction very strange. I stood paralyzed, not knowing how to react. Then everything froze. It's difficult to explain, but the environment, my grandmother, the sounds from outside, everything stopped as if paused. It was at this moment that I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't. Suddenly, I heard my grandmother's voice again asking, "What's wrong, dear? Are you okay?" I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't leave my mouth. The scene remained frozen. She wasn't moving, and yet I could hear her speaking. Fear overwhelmed me when suddenly everything began to distort, like a video with glitches. My grandmother's voice repeated tirelessly, "What's wrong, dear? Are you okay? What's wrong, dear? Are you okay?" I couldn't escape the dream. I finally awoke screaming, completely agitated. My heart was racing, and I had to pinch myself to make sure I was truly awake. I was back in my Brooklyn apartment, and gradually my heart rate decreased. I tried to go back to sleep, thinking it was just a nightmare. Although it took time, I eventually fell asleep again, but this time without dreaming anything. For about a month, I continued sleeping without remembering any dreams, something unusual for me since I typically dream frequently, at least most days of the week. After this period, the scene that triggered everything repeated itself. I became convinced that that initial moment was what sparked the entire sequence of events that followed. It was another night similar to that first time. My grandmother and I were in the cabin kitchen, cooking together. I decided not to ask anything this time. I resolved to follow the natural course of things, believing nothing would happen if I simply ignored it. However, when my grandmother removed the food from the stove, she asked me exactly the same thing, even though I hadn't said anything. "What's wrong, dear? Are you okay?" Immediately, everything began to distort again. Her words echoed like a scratched record or a defective VHS tape. "What's wrong, dear? Are you okay?" I was terrified. I hadn't done anything, just let things flow. But suddenly the kitchen plunged into darkness, and I woke up. I tried to calm myself and went back to sleep, repeating to myself that it was just a dream. However, from that night on, this strange nightmare began to repeat frequently. Now I can say I dream at most once a week, and when I do, it's always the same scenario, the same moment. My grandmother removes something from the stove, starts asking me the same question repeatedly. Everything around me distorts, and I wake up. Sometimes it takes longer to wake up, but the pattern is always the same. I don't dream about anything else. My sleep has become disturbed, and I wake up startled and exhausted. To make matters worse, with each repetition, my grandmother's figure in the dream becomes more distorted, almost unrecognizable. I feel as if something has broken in my dreams, something I can't fix. I know to many this might seem unimportant, just a dream, nothing more. But the truth is I can't truly rest. This recurring dream leaves me completely exhausted. It's frustrating and frightening to see the same scene repeated every time I manage to dream. I've looked for answers in forums, in online groups, but nothing has helped. I know help exists, but nothing I find seems sufficient, and this issue won't leave me in peace. Why does it affect me so much? Why can't I dream about anything else? What do I need to do? I spoke with my actual grandmother on the phone the other day, but even that frightened me. I was terrified of hearing her voice ask the same thing she does in my dreams. Honestly, I don't know what's worse. What I read about the danger of asking for the time in dreams, or what's happening to me now. This shouldn't be happening, right? After all, they're just dreams. Because of this constant repetition, next week I'm going to consult with someone recommended by a friend, a specialist in dreams or something similar. I didn't understand exactly, but they said he has dealt with strange cases related to dreams before. When I briefly spoke with him on the phone, he explained that this isn't common and that I would need to prepare myself because getting out of this situation would be a difficult process. That's why I decided to share my experience here. If the treatment doesn't work, or if it turns out to be deceptive, at least I will have told my story. If everything goes well, I promise to come back with an update. For now, that's all, but before closing, I leave a warning. Don't ask for the time during a dream, or do so at your own risk. I'm almost certain something bad happens when we try. Has anyone heard similar stories? What have people said about what can occur when we ask this question in a dream? Whatever happened has completely taken over any other dream I might have had. Everything has been replaced by this same scene repeated incessantly, with no space for anything different. The night of my 11th birthday changed everything I thought I knew about the world. My name is Sarah, and I grew up in rural Louisiana, where the lines between Christianity and older traditions blur into something unique. In our small bayou community, beliefs in voodoo and spiritual healers are deeply rooted, so much so that many families, including mine, have their own trusted spiritual advisor. For us, that person was Miss Aliner, a family friend for generations. She read cards, performed rituals, and protected us from negative influences. Though we attended church every Sunday, we also understood that there were invisible forces surrounding us, saints, spirits, energies we couldn't fully comprehend. We believed all of it existed simultaneously in our world. My story begins on that 11th birthday. It was a grand celebration with relatives and friends gathered at our lakeside home, and Miss Aliner was among the invited guests. Since I was little, I had always regarded her with a mixture of respect and unease. I remember that afternoon, while some women were chatting near the lake, I lingered nearby, listening without understanding much, but intensely curious. Everything seemed normal until my father's colleague, Thomas, visibly intoxicated, approached the group of women. He began dancing excessively, almost aggressively, until he suddenly shoved a woman into the lake. The problem: she was 8 months pregnant. The scene was horrifying. Everyone turned against Thomas, but the most striking reaction came from Miss Alina. She stared at him with a frightening calmness, as if she already knew what was coming. When things had settled somewhat, Miss Alina took a glass of bourbon, looked directly at Thomas, and declared in an icy voice that still echoes in my memory, "Because of your foolishness, the inevitable will happen. I'm warning you only out of mercy. Your mother will be left unprotected in 7 days and will pass peacefully. There's nothing you can do because the illness she carries will consume her. But your actions today will bring misfortune to your life, and until I reach my cabin, you will become as a cat, a dog, and a pig to pay for your disrespect toward this woman and her unborn child." As soon as she finished speaking, Thomas collapsed to the ground as if unconscious. When he stood up, he was different. His eyes were empty, and his behavior was completely animalistic. He crawled, growled, cried, and soiled himself like an animal. When my stepfather tried to restrain him, Thomas bit his hand like a rabid dog. It was surreal, this family friend now acting like a beast, even urinating and rolling in the dirt. A grotesque scene that seemed straight out of a nightmare. While everyone was in shock, Miss Alina remained impassive. Still, she found time to issue a warning to my cousin, saying that when she turned 20, she would have a child with an irresponsible man. To me, she said something that haunts me to this day, that I would have 2 children, but one of them wouldn't survive birth. Nobody knew what to do. The chaos continued until my stepfather decided to drive Miss Alina home, believing this might bring some relief. And he was right. The moment Miss Alina entered her cabin deep in the swamp, Thomas, who was still acting like an animal, collapsed again. When he got up, he seemed exhausted but human once more. It was as if a dark force had been ripped from him the moment Miss Alina left the party. The following day, no one could find an explanation for what had happened. However, the most terrifying part was realizing that everything Miss Alina had said that night came true. Thomas's mother passed away exactly 7 days later, peacefully in her sleep, just as she had predicted. My cousin, upon turning 20, gave birth to a son, but the father abandoned them, exactly as Miss Alina had warned. And as for me, I still carry her last prophecy in my mind, not knowing if someday it will also become reality. Since that night, I've experienced many other striking situations involving Miss Alina, all reinforcing my conviction that there are forces and mysteries beyond our understanding. The memory of that birthday remains etched in my mind, a stark reminder that some truths in this world cannot be easily explained. My name is Thomas Blackwell. I'm originally from Asheville, North Carolina, and this is my account of the strangest experience of my life. I genuinely can't explain what happened, but something in that house convinced me that it wasn't mere coincidence or chance. Before I begin, I should clarify that I'm not someone with abilities to see spirits or receive messages in dreams. No one in my family has that kind of sensitivity. I mention this because what I experienced was so extraordinary that it defies rational explanation. I had just moved into a rented house in a small coastal town in Maine because of work. I had paid the first month's rent and security deposit with help from my boss, who even lent me money to make the transition easier. I was working at a tech company in Portland, and the daily commute would have been too exhausting. So I found this small house just 2 blocks from Hawthorne Elementary School. On Thursday of that first week, as I was getting up from the table after dinner, I saw a boy in the living room. I stood frozen, staring at him, and asked if he was my neighbor. It was the first thought that came to mind. The boy, appearing about 7 years old, had pale skin and short curly hair. He wore a navy blue t-shirt with a Star Wars print, green shorts, and sandals. The lighting in the living room allowed me to see him clearly, but in response to my question, he just looked at me and ran toward the kitchen. I decided to follow him, not running but hurriedly. When I entered the kitchen, he was no longer there. The only exit from the room was through the door I had just come through. I searched the pantry, the only piece of furniture included in the kitchen, and even opened the refrigerator, but he wasn't anywhere. I convinced myself he was a mischievous neighbor who had somehow slipped out without me noticing. I didn't know anyone on the street yet, so I had no idea what the residents were like. I decided to let it go. That night, I double-checked all doors and windows before going to bed, because if a child had managed to get in, anyone could. Despite being concerned, I went to bed certain that the house was secure. The next day, I wasn't thinking much about what had happened, except when I left for work and made sure to verify that everything was locked, taking care that no one could enter. I also looked around the neighborhood, trying to find the boy. I didn't want to cause problems, just introduce myself and get to know the neighbors, but I never saw him. I continued my routine for more than a week. It was only the following Thursday, as I was brushing my teeth before bed, that something caught my attention again. As I was heading to my bedroom, I noticed movement in the kitchen. I turned to look, and there he was, standing at the kitchen entrance. This time he was making gestures with his hands, pointing at the floor. This time I knew everything was securely locked. At that moment, I imagined the boy knew about some secret entrance and was just trying to play a trick on me. So I spoke in a firmer tone. "What are you doing? Where do you live? This isn't right, what you're doing." I continued walking toward him, and right before my eyes, he simply vanished. I didn't run or hurry. I went to my bedroom in silence, overcome by a shock that's difficult to describe. It wasn't exactly fear, but the impact of witnessing that left me speechless. I was afraid, of course, but I didn't know what to think or how to act. Still, the most curious thing was the sleep that overtook me that night. I know my body well, and yet I fell asleep quickly, as if something beyond the ordinary had happened. The next morning, I woke with a fresh memory of what I had seen, but I preferred to attribute everything to fatigue. It was easier to convince myself that I had imagined the scene than to seek explanations that didn't exist. And so I moved forward. 4 days passed until the next episode. That day, I woke in the middle of the night, startled by a dream so vivid it was disturbing. In the dream, I was lying in my bedroom just as I always sleep, everything dark and quiet. However, in the dream, my eyes were open, and I couldn't move my body or fall asleep. That's when I clearly heard a child's voice. He was saying that he was below. I looked around but saw no one. The voice came from the foot of the bed, but it was impossible for anyone to be there since my mattress was on the floor, without a frame or base. In the dream, I remember that the bedroom door was closed. However, I woke with the distinct sensation that the child had left the room, repeating the word below while opening the door. When I awoke, I realized the door was indeed open. I never left it that way, especially with my concern about someone breaking in. I tried to convince myself that perhaps I hadn't closed it properly, and the draft had pushed it open. It was the most logical explanation I could come up with. I picked up my phone, distracted myself for a few minutes, and went back to sleep. That's how I dealt with it, looking for simple explanations. These events, curiously, happened on spaced-out days. Nothing strange happened in between. My routine remained normal: work, home, rest. I thought about it, yes, but not to the point of becoming distressed. It was the following Thursday, arriving home early from work while there was still daylight, that I saw him again. There he was, walking calmly toward the kitchen with his gaze fixed on the floor. And once more, he disappeared before my eyes. I entered the kitchen, now gripped by real fear, and searched every corner. He wasn't there. What I noticed this time was that his image seemed different. It was as if he were a projection, something translucent, without the solidity of a real person. At that moment, I convinced myself it was stress speaking loudly, although I had no concrete reasons for this. I was doing well at work. My bills were paid. My life seemed in order. It was the only explanation that made any sense to me. Despite trying to rationalize, I no longer felt at ease in that house. I carried with me the sensation that he could appear at any moment. However, nothing happened again that day. That same night, I dreamed again. In the dream, I was sitting in the living room watching television. Everything seemed normal until I heard a child's voice coming from in front of me, between the TV and the sofa. He was saying almost desperately that he was there, that I needed to follow him. The voice was clear, with the typical tone of a child that age. He repeated that I should look there, that it was below, begging me to see what he was showing. Even without seeing him, I could hear him moving around the house. The voice moved away toward the kitchen, always pleading, "There, please see me." I suddenly woke up in bed when I heard something falling in the kitchen. My first reaction was to think someone had broken in. I wasn't going to let myself be intimidated. I got up determinedly, shouting that the police were already on their way, mixing in curses and turning on all the lights along the way. When I reached the kitchen, I found everything dark and silent. On the floor, 2 plastic cups were still wobbling, as if they had just been knocked over. It was at this moment that I connected the dots. That boy was in the kitchen. There was no denying it anymore. The house was locked, and the only explanation was him. This time I was genuinely scared. I noticed something strange. In the dreams, I heard his voice but didn't see him. When I was awake, I could see him but never heard his voice. And there was always that insistence on the word below. The next morning, I could barely rest. I would sleep for short periods and then wake up restless. Later, the owner of the house appeared, knocking at the door. He seemed agitated, almost panicked. I only knew him because a friend had recommended that property for rent. That afternoon, he asked me to vacate the house immediately, saying he would refund all the money for the month. He seemed to be in an altered state, as if under the influence of something. I refused. We had signed a contract, and I wasn't going to give in so easily. Despite this, he insisted, not aggressively, but almost begging. He seemed frightened, as if carrying a burden he couldn't share. I ended up giving in, on the condition that he also return the security deposit that same day. I didn't know what situation he was involved in, but he agreed without hesitation. Later, while gathering my few belongings, he appeared again, handed me the money exactly as agreed, and asked, almost pleading, that I not take any action against him for breaking the contract. He said someone else would be in the house, but not as a tenant. He apologized, saying sometimes things were just that way. I left without questioning him further. I accepted the money and went to a friend's house downtown, where I stayed until I found another place to live. It was only later, when I was already settled in another house, that the boy returned to my dreams. I don't know what that man's situation was, but I can only imagine that something very serious happened in that house. Perhaps someone died there. Maybe the boy was trying to alert me about something buried in that place. He insisted on below, as if it were something I should see or know. But to this day, I've never understood why in dreams he spoke, but I couldn't see him, while when awake, I saw him but never heard him. And of course, the landlord's haste for me to leave reinforced this feeling that something was hidden. Why refund everything so quickly? Why such urgency? Now I wonder, can dreams be warnings? Has anyone else had a similar experience, where dreams warned about something that somehow connected to reality? And furthermore, if you knew that a dream could be a warning, how would you react? Is there something we can do to prevent what is being announced? Or do we only realize the meaning of dreams when it's already too late? It's been 13 years since I left that house in Maine. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, hearing that child's voice desperately trying to tell me something was below. I've considered going back, just to see if the house is still there, if someone else lives there now. But part of me is afraid of what I might find, or what might find me again. My name is James, and I'm what you'd call a skeptic by nature, but open to possibilities. I've always been fascinated by stories of the unexplained, those whispered accounts of things that defy rational explanation. Working as a park ranger in upstate New York keeps me busy with long shifts, sometimes 4 consecutive days of 14 hours each. The demanding schedule means I'm constantly on the move, traversing remote areas with only my thoughts and the occasional podcast for company. I've heard countless tales of strange encounters in the wilderness, but I'd never experienced anything truly inexplicable myself until Wednesday, December 15th. Growing up, I'd had a few curious experiences. When I was 8, during a winter camping trip with my scout troop, we took a group photo by a frozen lake. Later examining the picture, we noticed a tall, elongated figure standing behind me. None of us remembered anyone else being there, and whatever it was towered well over 6 feet, impossible to be part of my childish frame that barely reached 4 feet tall. Despite this peculiar incident, I'd never encountered anything that fundamentally shook my understanding of reality. That changed on that cold Wednesday in December. I had just finished a grueling rotation of shifts, and was looking forward to my 3 days off. Some friends and I had planned a getaway to a remote cabin in the Adirondacks, a place I won't name out of respect for the owner's business. We departed from my apartment around 8 in the morning, aiming to arrive by 11 before the forecasted snowstorm intensified. The journey was smooth, and we arrived precisely on time. We unpacked our supplies, stocked the old-fashioned refrigerator with craft beers, and spent the afternoon exploring the surrounding woods and the partially frozen lake nearby. As darkness fell around 4:30, the exhaustion from my work schedule began to weigh heavily on me. While my friends gathered around the indoor stone fireplace in the main room, I excused myself and retreated to the upstairs bedroom. The cabin had an unusual layout, built in the 1930s and renovated sporadically over the decades. The ground floor featured an open-concept living area with a kitchen, dining space, and the large stone fireplace, plus a small bathroom hidden behind a rustic bookshelf filled with old field guides and faded novels. The upper level contained 3 bedrooms connected by a narrow hallway with worn wooden floorboards that creaked with every step. I chose the largest bedroom, which featured a massive cedar wardrobe dating back to the cabin's original construction. The wardrobe was unusually deep, nearly 2 feet, providing ample space for our winter gear. I organized my things, put on my headphones, and scrolled through my phone while lying on the bed, occasionally responding to messages from friends back in the city. At some point, I decided to use the bathroom to avoid having to get up later, and subsequently drifted off to sleep. I awoke suddenly at 2:17 in the morning, disoriented and uncertain what had roused me. My phone was playing an old Supernatural podcast episode, not unusual since my listening history often prompted the algorithm to autoplay similar content when I fell asleep. What struck me as odd was that the bedroom door stood slightly ajar, and the hallway light was off. I distinctly remembered leaving the light on, and the door fully closed since I was the only one sleeping upstairs. Assuming one of my friends had checked on me, I got up, switched the hallway light back on, and secured the door. Through the frost-covered window, I could see my friends still awake downstairs, their silhouettes visible through the first-floor windows as they continued their late-night conversations. My heart was racing inexplicably. I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to calm myself. Something felt wrong, a sensation I couldn't articulate, but that resonated through every fiber of my being. Looking out the window again, I found comfort in seeing my friends, their presence a reminder that I wasn't truly alone in this remote location. I debated joining them downstairs, but hesitated at the thought of opening the door. What if whatever had awakened me was still out there? Eventually, I mustered the courage, put on my boots, and began descending the stairs. As I made my way down, the temperature dropped noticeably, becoming far colder than it should have been inside the heated cabin. Thinking the night air would be even more frigid, I decided to return for my fleece jacket and phone. Upon re-entering the bedroom, I was assaulted by an overpowering stench, like wet soil mixed with sulfur, and something unmistakably organic in decay. I assumed it might be coming from the plumbing beneath the floorboards, and made a mental note to mention it to the property owner later. Eager to escape the smell, I closed the door and hurriedly searched for my jacket in the wardrobe. While rummaging through the hanging clothes, I heard the door slowly open behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but the doorway was empty, attributing it to a draft from the old building's poor insulation. I continued my search. Suddenly, my phone began ringing loudly, startling me so severely that I dropped it onto the wooden floor. It was one of my friends calling. I quickly silenced the device, and before I could answer, I heard the door creaking open once more. This time, something appeared in the gap, a pallid face with elongated features, and two distinct protrusions extending from its forehead. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering in from the hallway, I could make out an impossibly tall figure, easily 7 feet, draped in what appeared to be a deep crimson cloak or robe. Terror seized me, and I instinctively backed deeper into the wardrobe, stepping on piles of our discarded clothing. As I retreated, the creature extended an unnaturally long arm and opened the upper door of the wardrobe. Paralyzed with fear, I pressed myself against the back panel, pulling the doors shut completely. The smell had become unbearable, nearly triggering my gag reflex. Then I heard heavy footsteps ascending the stairs, the deliberate, weighty sounds of something massive approaching. In that moment, I frantically tried to decide what to do. Make a run for it, try to push past the entity, call for help, or remain hidden. Fear rendered me immobile as the wardrobe door began to open slowly. I heard labored breathing, a deep, rhythmic sound reminiscent of a large animal after exertion. Though it seems impossible, I swear I felt something enormous encircling me, as if it were examining me from all angles while remaining physically still. Then mercifully, the presence seemed to withdraw. The heavy footsteps receded, giving me a momentary sense of relief. But my reprieve was short-lived, as new footsteps began climbing the stairs. The bedroom door burst open, the light flicked on, and one of my friends called my name loudly. Still trembling, I emerged from the wardrobe. My friends looked startled by my appearance, but quickly assumed I was attempting to prank them. Unable to articulate what had happened, I rushed past them to the bathroom. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, trying to understand my bizarre behavior. All I could muster was a weak explanation about having a nightmare. We avoided discussing the incident for the remainder of the night, though I remained profoundly disturbed. The following evening, as we naturally drifted into sharing spooky stories, a tradition during our trips, I finally gathered the courage to recount my experience. A heavy silence fell over our group, until one friend reluctantly shared something unsettling. Before coming upstairs to find me, he had stepped outside to use the outhouse rather than the indoor bathroom. While outside, he'd heard what sounded like heavy footsteps moving across the upper floor. He tried to convince himself it was just me walking around, but something about the sound didn't seem human. Another friend who had been tending the fire mentioned something even more disturbing. He had glanced up at my bedroom window and noticed a strange phenomenon, what appeared to be a small flame igniting and extinguishing in quick succession. He then claimed to have seen me looking out the window, as if I had been turning the light on and off without making any discernible movement. He had assumed I was preparing to join them downstairs. What he said next chilled us all. A tall figure draped in something red seemed to move across my room. Initially, he thought it was me adjusting blankets or moving around, but the way it moved and its distinctive silhouette seemed inhuman. Alarmed, he had called another friend over, and together they decided to come check on me. We were all deeply shaken. By mutual agreement, we gathered our sleeping bags and spent the rest of the night together in the main room, finding safety in numbers. The following morning, we hastily prepared breakfast, packed our vehicles, and left the property as quickly as possible. Though some tried to rationalize what happened, suggesting it was a shared delusion brought on by exhaustion and the power of suggestion, the consistency in our independent observations left little room for doubt. Something unnatural had been in that cabin with us. We made a pact never to return to that location and rarely speak of what transpired. Whatever presence dwells in that isolated cabin in the Adirondacks remains there, undisturbed, waiting perhaps for the next unwitting visitors to cross its threshold. I've decided to share this story because it still gives me chills to this day. I hope you can make some sense of what I experienced. When I was in graduate school, I lived for about a year and a half in a small, cozy cottage in a gated community in rural Vermont. My place was the only one with stained glass panels on the front door, which meant anyone outside could see if the hallway light was on. The community had its peculiarities. Several houses were abandoned or still under construction, which honestly made the place feel somewhat unsafe. Security was inadequate since the guards never stayed long, disappearing without notice. We were completely without surveillance for days at a time, and during one such period, we decided to take precautions. Our first measure was replacing the padlock on the main gate with a more robust lock. Then we installed barbed wire along the entire wall, surrounding the community. As fate would have it, I was away on a quick trip for a research project when these changes were implemented. I planned to return the next day, but ended up staying longer at my colleague's insistence to complete our work. When I finally returned, it was 3 a.m. on the third night. I arrived at the community gate exhausted, wearing only a hoodie and carrying a backpack full of dirty clothes. My phone was completely dead. When I tried to open the gate, I realized I had forgotten to ask for the key to the new lock. Discomfort overwhelmed me. There was no way I wanted to spend the night on the street at that hour. I considered climbing the wall, but feared neighbors might see me and raise an alarm. Then I remembered an unoccupied house in the community that might serve as a passage point. I walked around the outside perimeter, reaching an empty lot right behind that house. Hurried and nervous, I ran through debris and bushes to the wall separating the lot from the community. Heart racing, I made sure no one was around, but as I prepared to climb, I suddenly remembered something I'd completely forgotten: the barbed wire. In the darkness, I felt discouragement wash over me as fear threatened to take hold. I briefly considered returning to the street and trying to find somewhere to spend the night. But while searching the lot, I found a wooden beam large enough to help me climb. I also took an old t-shirt from my backpack to protect my hands from the wire. With considerable effort and a small cut on my arm, I managed to get across, falling on the other side with a muffled thud, groaning quietly. But then something strange happened. A weak, flickering light caught my attention. It came from the supposedly empty house's backyard. I watched, surprised. The light was unusual, yellowish with a greenish tint, flickering like a candle flame. My curiosity grew. The night's silence seemed to encourage me to investigate further. But before I could do anything, a weak, trembling voice sounded behind me. "You're hurt." A shiver ran through my entire body, forcing me to turn abruptly. In the dim light, I glimpsed a silhouette in a light nightgown sitting in a chair next to a tall shrub. I was certain the yard had been empty until then. The silence seemed eternal until, with slow movements, the figure rose and walked toward the house. That's when I realized it was a very elderly woman, bent with age. I remained quiet, scanning the environment, trying to locate an exit. I was close to my house, but something held my attention. The shrub next to the chair was swaying slightly despite there being no wind. The rest of the yard was static and immersed in an unsettling silence. Suddenly, the old woman reappeared, approaching me. "I can't stand being alone with him anymore," she said, her words confirming the bad feeling consuming me. I tried to leave through the corridor leading to the main street, but the gate was locked. Then she asked with a smile that revealed darkened gums, "You came to keep me company, didn't you?" She then let out a high-pitched laugh, strangely duplicated, like a child's laugh echoing. Without hesitation, I ran toward the gate, jumped over it, and continued down the tree-lined street until I stopped at the median strip, trying to control my ragged breathing. My heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. When I looked back, I noticed the trees blocked the view of that frightening house. I started walking again, trying to stay calm, until a sound cut through the silence, a low laugh. When I turned, I saw feet moving between the tree trunks. My reaction was to run again, and when I finally spotted my front door, I heard another laugh, closer this time. The old woman was running, her face almost disfigured by laughter, displaying strands of gray hair swaying in the wind. Her short legs moved with terrifying speed under the trembling nightgown. Shaking, I struggled to unlock the door and get inside. When I managed to close it, one of the door's glass panels shattered. Her arm appeared, moving with frightening strength, trying to reach me. After some time, she gave up and left. Still dazed, I heard her laughter outside. Glass shards covered the floor, but there was no trace of blood. Cautiously approaching the window, I observed lights in other houses turning on. Some neighbors came out, curious. This calmed me somewhat. I collapsed on the sofa and closed my eyes until exhaustion overcame me. The next morning, 2 neighbors woke me by knocking on my door. They wanted to know if I was all right and discuss what had happened. When I confessed that I had jumped the community wall, I noticed their discomfort. Reluctantly, they mentioned Mrs. Alina, who had lived alone since her daughter and husband died from a rare disease. No one said anything more. During the time I lived in that community, I noticed residents avoided talking about her. Perhaps they wanted to protect her, but why did they do it so discreetly? I asked, still hesitantly, if they were sure she was alone that night. I didn't want to go into more details, and they also avoided delving deeper. They just recommended that I follow the same caution they did, suggesting it would be better for the community. Apparently, the residents themselves had taken responsibility for Mrs. Alina, ensuring she received the necessary attention. A few days after the incident, I completed my obligations and moved away. I don't like revisiting this story because it always brings an uncomfortable feeling that's difficult to describe. Sometimes this memory still haunts me in nightmares. Deep down, I believe Mrs. Aliner wasn't really alone in that house. I grew up in a small lakeside town in northern Michigan, where pine forests stretched as far as the eye could see, and gravel roads connected scattered neighborhoods. Our house sat on a narrow street with a concrete patio, where my mother loved to cultivate herbs and hardy flowers that could withstand the harsh winters. I remember being a child and spending afternoons playing card games with my younger sister Emma in the hallway that separated the bedrooms from the main living room. My mother, Joyce, worked in the kitchen most of the day, always accompanied by the radio playing softly in the background. My father, Robert, would leave early to work as a security guard at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, returning only in the late afternoon with a tired but serene look on his face. From an early age, my best friend was Melissa. She lived just a few houses away from ours, and we knew each other because our mothers would visit to drink coffee and exchange recipes for cakes and homemade preserves. Melissa and I were the same age, and during childhood, we used to play tag in her backyard, which was full of fruit trees and flowers hanging in large pots. We'd run among the plants, create imaginary stories, and sometimes pretend we were explorers of an unknown world. I felt safe in her company because we were like sisters who shared every discovery of daily life. As we grew older, we attended the same local school. It was a simple building, with classrooms ventilated by barred windows and worn-out desks. Nevertheless, Melissa and I enjoyed learning new things. We did group projects together, and were often seen in the hallways talking and laughing. I considered her not just a friend, but someone who would always be by my side during good and bad times. However, when we reached high school, small differences began to emerge. While I continued to attend classes with enthusiasm, Melissa sometimes seemed disheartened. She said she didn't see the point in studying so much. Our parents noticed this change, but preferred not to intervene directly. Still, we remained close. During breaks, we exchanged snacks and confidences, laughed at small jokes, and nothing seemed to shake the friendship that had grown with us. Upon completing sophomore year, each of us had to choose a different path for the rest of high school. I enrolled in a nearby school that offered a technical course in healthcare. Melissa, on the other hand, went to another institution that provided a curriculum more focused on STEM, because her parents encouraged her to become an engineer. Although we attended different schools, we still saw each other regularly. We would walk around town on weekends or meet at small community events, like the town festival held every year in mid-July. Around my 17th birthday, I began to feel an urge to explore the world beyond our small town. I was preparing to take college entrance exams in a larger city, and between books and study guides, I also met new people who came from other regions to study. It was during one of those academic conversations that I became close to Nathan. He was a friendly guy with short hair and a calm voice. We bumped into each other at a small bookstore where I was looking for a biology manual. He started the conversation by asking if I was taking prep courses, and we exchanged contacts. We began to talk frequently. Nathan would invite me for smoothies or snacks after preparatory classes, Before I knew it, I was already nurturing feelings of affection for him. Amid laughter and walks, we started dating. I remember the first time I mentioned Melissa to him. I said I had a childhood friend who was almost like a sister, and that I'd like them to meet. He seemed enthusiastic and said, "Sure, we can arrange something for the weekend." However, when I mentioned the same idea to Melissa, she became strangely hesitant. She replied that she was busy studying for exams and might not be able to make it. After several attempts to find a time when the three of us could meet, she stopped responding to my messages. That caused me some unease, but I tried not to let it affect me too much. I thought maybe she was going through some turbulent period. After all, we'd been friends for a long time, and nothing seemed capable of destroying that bond. I finished high school, and with my entrance exam results in hand, I prepared to move to the city and enter university. It wasn't a huge institution, but it was still far from our town. I began living in a small student apartment with a classmate who also came from elsewhere. Melissa and I, at that point, were only talking sporadically. Sometimes she would appear on social media to comment on a photo of mine with Nathan, but rarely called me to chat. Deep down, I thought everything would eventually return to normal. Nathan and I officially became a couple. He would visit my hometown with me on holidays or long weekends and got to know my family. My father asked questions about his future, where he planned to work, and if he intended to continue studying. My mother observed in silence, but ultimately approved of the relationship, only saying that I should take care of my heart. On a particular weekend, Melissa suddenly appeared at my parents' doorstep. She said she wanted to rekindle our friendship and missed when we were inseparable. I welcomed her with joy because I still considered her my best friend. I sat with her on the porch and asked how her life was going. She told me she couldn't get into a university at the same time as I did and was feeling lonely in town. She also said, "You know, if you invite me again to go out with Nathan, I'll go. I think I was a bit weird before, but now I want to get to know your boyfriend better." I was pleased and set up a meeting for the following weekend. However, on the agreed day, Melissa canceled at the last minute. Then she tried to reschedule, but we kept missing each other. With each attempt, something happened. Either her phone was off, or she would send messages only the next day saying she had fallen ill. I tried not to judge, but there was always the impression that she was avoiding me while, at the same time, demanding closeness. It was confusing. The weeks passed, and university life completely absorbed me. Between classes, assignments, and labs, I hardly had time to return to my hometown. Nathan and I maintained our routine of meeting during breaks, and everything was going well. Until one day, I received a call from Melissa saying she urgently needed to talk to me. Her voice sounded distressed and somewhat desperate. "Please, I just want to talk. It's been so long since we've seen each other, and I miss being your confidant. Don't abandon me." I felt sorry for her. We agreed that during the next long weekend, I would go to town and spend an afternoon with her. When I arrived, Melissa was waiting for me at the gate of her house. She had a package of cornbread muffins in her arms, saying she had made them especially for me. We talked, laughed a bit, and she wanted to know how I was doing at university. She mentioned feeling very bad about having distanced herself from me, and that she would like to make up for it by being more present. She said she could accompany me on any outing with Nathan, that we could form an inseparable trio of friends. At first, I found it pleasant, but over time, I noticed she would send me messages all day long, asking if I was with him, what we were doing, and if I would visit him soon. When I returned to university, I took the muffins to my room. I tried one of them and found the taste strange, somewhat bitter. I didn't want to throw them away out of respect, but I also couldn't eat any more. I left them in a corner of the communal kitchen and ended up forgetting about them. A few days later, I entered the room and smelled a rancid odor. The muffins were already spoiled. I threw everything in the trash, believing it was just a recipe that hadn't turned out well. During this time, Melissa was sending me increasingly long and insistent messages, but without saying anything concrete. She would ask if I was okay, how my health was, if I was eating properly. I found it curious, but replied that everything was normal. The heavy university routine prevented me from paying much attention, and I didn't realize that this was a turning point in our relationship. At the end of that year, there was a small community festival in town, something similar to a harvest celebration where families gathered to eat, drink, and pray. I went with my parents and my sister Emma. Nathan was busy, so he couldn't accompany me. Upon arriving, I immediately saw Melissa helping to organize the tables. She ran up to me, handed me a plate of pumpkin preserves, and wanted to chat. Try it, I made it with my mother's recipe. It's quite tasty. I tasted it out of politeness. I must have made an involuntary grimace because I felt a slight metallic flavor. Melissa asked if I had liked it. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth and just smiled, trying to disguise it. The wind that blew at that moment brought a chill. It might have been a coincidence, but I had a strange premonition. Before leaving, Melissa insisted that I take some jars of the preserves home. I thanked her but left everything there, saying I already had a lot of luggage to take back to university. The following weeks were turbulent. I began to feel too tired for any activity. My classmates noticed that my face looked haggard. In group projects, I couldn't concentrate. I started having mild fevers and intense headaches that would appear suddenly. Nathan, concerned, insisted on taking me to local doctors. I did blood tests, urine tests, routine exams, everything normal. There was no plausible explanation for my condition. As the days passed, the exhaustion became unbearable. I would wake up in the morning as if I hadn't slept. Many times, I missed classes because I couldn't get out of bed. At night, even though I was exhausted, I slept poorly and woke up startled with the impression of having seen shadows in my room. It seemed like someone was spying on me from the corners. I mentioned this to Nathan, who didn't know what to say. He tried to calm me down, held my hand, and repeated that everything would be all right. However, not even he could handle what was happening. My mother, upon learning of my condition, came to the city to pick me up. I tried to resist because I didn't want to interrupt the semester, but she insisted. She said that if doctors couldn't find anything, perhaps it would be better for me to stay at home until I recovered. I returned home wrapped in blankets and with a weakness that drained my energy. My father looked at me with concern and tried to find practical solutions, preparing teas, keeping the house quiet so I could rest, calling acquaintances to see if anyone had an effective home remedy. Amid this fog of fatigue, Melissa appeared at our door offering help. She brought cookies and a broth that she claimed to have made especially for me. My mother, without suspicion, received the offerings with gratitude. Already uncomfortable, I only took a few spoonfuls of the broth. The taste was strange, but my mother encouraged me to drink it to regain my strength. That same day, I became ill with vomiting and tremors. My mother was frightened and took me to the local hospital, where I received IV fluids. New tests, however, indicated nothing out of the ordinary. The doctors released me hours later, only asking that I stay hydrated and rest. That unexplained deterioration made my mother begin to suspect something more serious. However, it still didn't cross her mind that Melissa could have any involvement. She was a girl who had grown up with me, frequented our house since she was little. It would be absurd to suspect her. I also was reluctant to accept the possibility that my friend was harming me. Actually, my mother began to suspect an imbalance in food, or even a mysterious poisoning. But occasionally, she would drop a worried comment. I wonder if someone is jealous. But that must be nonsense. Nevertheless, the fatigue continued and worsened. The dark circles under my eyes became deeper. My skin turned yellowish, and I had no appetite. My sister Emma would look at me with fear. Sometimes I would see her leaning against the doorframe of my room, observing in silence, as if expecting me to faint at any moment. Nathan tried to call me, but I didn't have the strength to talk for long. He offered to come to town to support me, but after a few days, he began to distance himself. He would only call to say words of encouragement, as if he didn't know how to deal with that mysterious illness. One afternoon, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. "I don't know what else to do," my father said with a grave voice. "Medicine doesn't explain what's happening to her." "Could it be something spiritual?" my mother sighed. "It could be. I'll look for someone who understands these things. I can't lose my daughter." A few days later, a family acquaintance mentioned a faith healer who lived in the outskirts of town, an elderly woman who helped people with prayers and blessings. My parents, desperate, decided to seek her out. When they brought her home, I saw an elderly woman with gray hair tied in a bun, wearing a long skirt and a simple blouse enter. She had firm eyes and introduced herself as Mrs. Patricia. "Let me look at the girl," she said, carrying a bag where she probably kept objects for prayer. "I feel something heavy in the air." I lay in my bed, barely able to react. "Mrs. Patricia asked everyone to leave, except my mother. She lit a candle, waved a bunch of herbs around me, and murmured prayers that I couldn't identify. The smell of the burning incense made me want to vomit. At some point, she told me to sit up, held my hands, and fixed her gaze on me. "You ate something that was given to you with ill intentions. I feel very dense energy. It seems like envy. It seems like resentment." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. I swallowed hard because the possibility that someone was intentionally harming me left me apprehensive. "Mrs. Patricia continued her prayer, passed the herbs around my head, blew on the lit candle, and I saw the smoke rise in spirals. Then she handed me a cup with a liquid that looked like a mixture of bitter leaves. I had to drink it slowly. The taste was horrible, but my mother insisted that I take it. Minutes later, I felt nauseous. My stomach was churning. Suddenly, I vomited right there, in an improvised basin. The smell that rose was unbearable, and I noticed whitish pieces that looked like hard flakes. My mother was horrified. "This is not normal," declared Mrs. Patricia, examining the content. "Someone mixed fragments of something strange in your food or drink." I began to cry, confused and frightened. My mother tried to calm me down, but her look also showed terror. Mrs. Patricia stated that she would need to do other spiritual cleansing sessions because there was a lot of negativity impregnated in me. Without hesitation, my mother allowed it. So I began to receive constant visits from the faith healer. At each meeting, she would give me new herbal baths, bitter teas, and say prayers, asking me to repeat some of them. Over time, even without fully understanding, I began to feel a slight improvement, as if the weight in my body was diminishing. However, those sessions were not easy. In one of them, I vomited again, releasing a dark liquid mixed with fragments that no one could explain. The faith healer interpreted those as signs of witchcraft. She said they were remnants of evil expelled from my body. My mother, increasingly convinced, began to take all possible precautions. She prayed the rosary at dawn, passed coarse salt around the corners of the house, and forbade me from eating anything that came from outside. That's when something happened that I'll never forget. One afternoon, Melissa's mother, Mrs. Karen, appeared at my house in a state of shock. My mother received her in the living room, and I heard raised voices from both of them. For a few minutes, I lay in bed without understanding what was happening. Then the woman ran out, almost tripping on the front steps. My mother returned to my room, pale. She found a flask with something that looked like bone powder and other weird things in Melissa's room, she said, breathing with difficulty. Melissa admitted that she cast a spell against you. She said it was out of jealousy, that she couldn't stand to see you well while she was stagnant. She mixed these things in the muffins, in the preserves, even in that soup she brought the other day. My God, what has this girl done? I felt my heart racing. A mixture of sadness and anger flooded me. I couldn't imagine that Melissa, my best friend, would be capable of something so cruel. My mother began calling neighbors who had knowledge of prayers or spiritual remedies, and received recommendations of other healers and good witches who could complement Mrs. Patricia's work. My father got the car, and shortly before dark, we headed towards a small dirt road because he had heard of another man, Mr. Wilson, who knew a lot about the subject. Emma stayed at home crying, not knowing how to deal with all of this. As we drove to this place, my father commented tensely, "Did you know that a few years ago, Melissa became interested in some strange books about witchcraft? They say she started visiting a woman who lived in a shack in the oldest part of town, but we never gave it much importance. She was so close to us, it never crossed our minds that she would turn against you." We entered a simple house illuminated by oil lamps and candles. Mr. Wilson was a tall man with a calm appearance and asked us to sit around a small table. He wanted to see what I was vomiting and analyzed some stains left in the basin, making low prayers and fixing his gaze on me. He repeated gestures similar to Mrs. Patricia's, passing a fresh plant over my shoulders and asking me to hold a handkerchief soaked in water with coarse salt. Then he gave me another liquid, with an even more bitter taste than the previous one. I felt nauseous again and vomited something so foul that my parents almost backed away. The man remained serious. This evil was done on purpose. She wanted you to weaken, perhaps even to die slowly without doctors discovering the real reason. This may not have all been expelled yet. We'll need several cleansings. My mother cried silently. My father, trembling, asked the man to do everything necessary. He paid for the services, and on the way back home, no one said anything in the car. We arrived at dawn. I was exhausted, but felt a slight improvement. It wasn't a complete cure, but at least my legs weren't shaking as much. In the days that followed, my house became a place of constant prayers and herbal baths. Mrs. Patricia and Mr. Wilson took turns in the rituals. In the morning, I would drink a dark and bitter tea. In the afternoon, I would rest. At night, I received a fumigation made with burning charcoal and plants that released a strong smell. My mother prayed while fanning me, reciting Our Fathers and Hail Marys, as if there were no tomorrow. Sometimes I had fevers, headaches, chills, but gradually my body was responding. During this process, Nathan appeared once, but couldn't stand to see the whole scene. He looked at me with pity and said, "I can't handle this. I'm sorry, but I can't continue." He left. I was already so tired and emotionally fragile that I didn't have the strength to beg him to stay. My mother consoled me, saying that if he didn't have the stomach for that moment, perhaps he wasn't the right person. My father, upon learning about it, merely pressed his lips in silence. He didn't want to discuss it, but it was evident that deep down, he was saddened for me. The routine of cures and blessings extended for more than a month. I ate carefully, and when I felt my stomach turning, I would run to vomit in a basin that my mother kept near me. Over time, the strange substances diminished until one day I vomited something that moved, looking like a small whitish worm. And after that, I didn't vomit anything more besides bile, and normal food remains. The faith healer and the healer said that represented the end of the purification process. After that, I began to sleep better and felt more energetic, although I was still weak. During this time, rumors spread throughout the town. Some said Melissa messed with diabolic things. Others said it was all an invention. Her mother, Mrs. Karen, disappeared from everyone's sight. Some commented that she had taken Melissa far away, perhaps to a distant relative, perhaps to a religious center to ask for forgiveness. I didn't want to know anymore. All the anger and disappointment, I felt mixed with a desire to move forward. It was then that about 2 weeks after this confession of witchcraft, news arrived that Melissa had died. They said she was isolated in a room having disturbing visions, and that her mother, not knowing how to help her, called a relative from another city. It was too late. Some attributed the tragic end to a kind of evil that turned against her, or to a troubled mental state. The town reacted with a mixture of fear and pity. There were those who prayed for her soul, those who blamed the rituals she had been practicing. I just received the news in silence, not knowing what to think. I felt a mixture of pity and relief that it had come to an end. My mother just hugged me and asked me not to cry for someone who had tried to destroy me. I continued with the spiritual cleansing sessions until Mrs. Patricia and Mr. Wilson said I no longer needed those daily rituals just to pray occasionally, keep a protection amulet, and not accept food from anyone who wasn't trusted. I began preparing herbal baths on my own whenever I felt some anguish, and my mother would relight the incense in the hallway of the house, keeping the environment light. Little by little, I regained the strength to study. Instead of immediately returning to the university city, I decided to wait until the next semester to make sure I was fully recovered. I read my books at home. I helped my mother in the kitchen, and occasionally accompanied my father to the town's grocery store. People looked at me with curiosity, but I avoided commenting on what had really happened. Some didn't even approach, fearing to hear the word witchcraft or spell. One day, while going out to buy bread, I met two former childhood classmates. They greeted me with a small, awkward smile and asked shallow questions about how I was doing. I responded superficially, and in a few minutes, the conversation ended. I got the impression they didn't want to get involved in controversies. I returned home a bit sad, but understanding that that subject was too heavy for most people. After about 5 months, I felt ready to resume the course at the university. My parents talked a lot with me before letting me leave. My mother insisted, "Don't accept anything to eat or drink from people you don't know well. Taking care of your health is important. Taking care of the energies that surround you is too. For God's sake, my daughter, learn from what you've experienced." My father gave me a strong hug, saying that if anything happened, I should call immediately. Emma made a drawing of a 4-leaf clover and gave it to me, saying it was for good luck. Then I packed my bags and left. As soon as I arrived at the apartment, I felt a mixture of longing and fear. The same bed was there, the closet with my books too. Classmates welcomed me well, but no one touched on the topic of my prolonged absence. I returned to classes slowly, still feeling some fatigue in the first days, but without the dizzy spells that had tormented me before. Nathan, however, was distant. I discovered he had met someone and no longer had an interest in reconciling. It hurt, but I resigned myself. I couldn't fully trust relationships anymore after everything that had happened with Melissa. I kept my attention on studies, made new friendships, but always with the care of not opening up too much. As time passed, I noticed that my body responded better to classroom routines, assignments, and readings. The nightmare of chronic weakness seemed increasingly distant. I still carried a certain fear when eating out. I preferred to prepare my own meals in the communal kitchen. Many just thought I had an eating issue, and I didn't make a point of clarifying. Months later, I completed the semester with reasonable grades. My parents were happy to know I hadn't had relapses. My mother reminded me in each call to pray before sleeping, and to leave a glass of water beside the bed to draw out bad energies. Maybe it was all superstition, but I no longer doubted anything. I preferred to maintain my precautions rather than risk myself again. When I finally graduated, I had the joy of seeing my family at the ceremony. Emma was now taller, my father grayer, and my mother, proud, held back tears. I remembered when I almost couldn't finish university because I was confined to bed, wasting away. I thanked them for having rescued me and believed in my cure. We went to dinner at a family place and then returned to town. I slept in my old bed, recalling the sensation of security that had finally returned to reign there. The next morning, My father informed me that a job opening had arisen in the city in my field of study. I got the position after an interview. I moved to a modest but comfortable apartment. Little by little, I laid the foundations of an independent life. I still carry the marks of what happened, but I try not to transform it into a chain that ties me to the past. Every night before turning off the light, I remember Melissa, that same girl who ran with me through backyards and shared secrets during school time. I wonder at what moment she decided to do me so much harm. I reflect on how something so sweet became so bitter. However, I don't feel hatred, just a remnant of pain and a lesson I will never forget. Some people, no matter how close they are, can carry in their hearts a poison made of envy and resentment. From everything, the prayers, the herbal baths, the caution with those who offer prepared food, and a deep respect for the invisible forces that surround us remain. I don't go back to town as frequently as before, but when I do, I find my parents and sister living in harmony. The house no longer has that dense air, the rue branches hanging on the doorposts, the coarse salt in the corners, and the constant prayers seem to have shielded the home against any new assault of bad energies. My mother still receives occasional visits from curious neighbors, but avoids giving details. She only advises that everyone take care and not underestimate the power of human malice. And so I continued my trajectory. Between the memory of vomiting strange pieces and the certainty that I almost lost my life, I found the strength to start over. When someone asks me why I'm so cautious, I smile and say that I went through a difficult illness. I don't make a point of going into details about witchcraft or spells. It's a story that belongs to my past, and that taught me more than years of study would be capable of. If today I maintain a certain distance from those who get too close without clear reasons, it's because I learned in the most painful way that betrayal sometimes comes from where you least expect it. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to be alerted to all future narrations. I release new videos every day here. Hope to see you in the next ones. Now on the screen, I'll leave 2 other good videos that I know you'll like. See you there. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing and good night.